Hey, everybody. We're going to start getting set up.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the May 5th workshop meeting. Happy Cinco de Mayo and of the Northwestern Lee High School District. And please join me for opening exercises. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. And Stacy, will you please call the roll?
Sure.
Here.
Willard Delliker,
Here.
Joseph Fetzinger,
Here.
Todd Hernandez,
Here.
Todd Leiser,
Here.
Rosemary Lister, here, Alan Rex,
Here.
Rachel Scheffler, here, James Workle.
Here.
Thank you. And we have everybody present. Next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. And I would like to, before we approve the agenda, I just want to clarify for the public who is with us tonight that there seems to be some misinformation, judging from a couple of emails that I got today. We will not have any votes on it or take any action on any agenda item this evening. This is a workshop where we discuss and deliberate. No action will be taken, and I just wanted to clarify that before we get into approving of the agenda and courtesy of the floor. So with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Scheffler.
Second.
By Mr. Rex. Any comments or questions or additions?
No, sir.
None? And all those in favor, aye?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no? So we have an agenda. Approval of school board meetings. We discussed this briefly last meeting, and I think because of COVID, there was some requirement to validate all of the action taken on Zoom meetings. So Superintendent Holman, would you please walk us through that, please?
Sure. The attachment that you have on your agenda, if you recall, in March, one of the first action items you did when school closed was to take an action to suspend policy 006 that said you needed to have at least 5 people in person as a quorum to take action. So at that point, we re-advertised all the meetings as Zoom meetings, as public Zoom meetings, and the way in which people would participate. This requires us to reinstate policy 006, which means from this point forward, there will need to be, for action meetings, at least 5 board members present. You can call in or Zoom in, but we need to have at least 5 present in order to be able to take action. And so this is a memo that lists all of the dates that you took action via a Zoom meeting, and you need to affirm the actions of the board for all of those meetings.
Okay, thank you. And that reaffirms the board's commitment to try to get back to normal here and be present at all of the board meetings. With that, I would ask for a motion to approve item 104.
So moved. Fatsinger.
Motion by Mr. Fatsinger, second by Mr. Rex. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion carried. Welcome again to all who are visiting with us this evening, joining us on Zoom. And at this time, we offer courtesy of floor to anyone who would like to address the board. Please begin by stating your name and address.
I don't see anyone, Mr. Delker.
Okay, nobody at this point. We will offer courtesy of floor again at the end of the meeting for anyone who would like to address the board. Under curriculum and building issues, we have approval of Act 80 days.
Mrs. Spitzel?
Yes, thank you. This is an annual item that I bring to you every year. And under Act 80, just for a quick review, we are required to provide 180 days of instruction for students, along with 900 hours for elementary schools and 990 for secondary schools every year. As long as we still meet the requirement for the minimum instructional hours for the school year at each level, we can then apply for Act 180 day exceptions through this Act 80, this caveat. So it is not used for lost time due to inclement weather. This year, we will only need to use it for our graduating seniors who will miss the last 4 days of school because their graduation is early this year. So PDE has defined some specific activities that we can use, which is the way that we would be approved for the Act 80 exception. Those activities are listed in the attached documents that I've included.
Okay, with that, it's a routine item that we will take action on in 2 weeks. And in 1 week, I'm sorry, we have a meeting on the 12th. Then we will take action on that item. Any questions or comments before we move on? Okay, then we'll move into policy. We have 3 policies this evening that are new for first reading. And Dr. Sosnovic, will you please talk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I'm going to pass it along to my colleagues, Mrs. Matika and Mrs. Stitzel. These 3 policies are recommended through our PSBA, PNN that we receive on a quarterly basis. And I'll turn it over to them to describe each of the respective policies.
I guess I'll start with policy 317.1, educator misconduct. This is a policy that's been in place probably going back to 2014 and then amendments to the law. And we've had the policy adopted in 2016. However, the additions tonight are simply related to the Title IX changes only, and the additions are highlighted in green.
And I will take the other 2. So Policy 150 deals with Title I comparability of services. This is a requirement that we have to complete every year in order to be in compliance with our federal programs. And the only change that is made at this time is that the method of determination for comparability has been removed because, quite honestly, there's no longer a choice on how comparability is calculated, and the online tool that we currently use does that automatically for us. So that is why that portion will be removed from the policy. The other policy that's up for revision is policy 333, professional development. And in Act 18 of 2019, it actually asks school districts, it actually requires school districts to include a minimum of 1 hour of required training in trauma-informed approaches in our professional development plan. So the language that we need to include is included in this new revision to the policy that's recommended.
Okay, thank you. These three policies will be posted for 30 days at least, and we will see them again under second reading in June. And any comments or questions before we leave policies? Okay. Under operations, 4.01 is the transportation software agreement. Art, are you going to talk us through that?
Yes, sir. Thank you. This is a software agreement with a company called SafeFleet. The transportation office staff and myself, we did an extensive search to go out and try to find out what software would be the best fit for us here at Northwestern United School District. Unanimously, we agreed with this one. There is some cost, obviously, to switching softwares, and we are still in a current software agreement. However, we want to run them concurrently for the remainder of this year and part of next year. They expire in March of next year. So this is the one that we chose, SafeFleet. I have all the information here for you. Leslie will probably explain to you where the money is coming from, because it's coming from somewhere. I'll let her talk about that. Because we're using some funds to pay for it that we can get it happening this year rather than next year. So, Leslie.
Okay, yeah. So in terms of the one-time implementation costs, we are looking at some funds that were previously included in the budget that were freed up because they were reallocated to grants or reallocated to COVID expenditures that we received some kind of reimbursement or funding from. So with those freed up budgetary funds, we are looking to purchase this software in this fiscal year, so 2021, and use that implementation one-time cost with those funds that we believe are available.
And as you see on that software, it does include quite a few items, the GPS systems as well for tracking the buses, which help with the efficiency. The software works with the GPS. They're one and the same instead of two separate units. There is that parent component, which we're going to pilot to see if it actually works and something we want to implement. That's something Ms. Holman and I will look at once we get it in place to see if it's too much information, the right amount of information. We feel it's important to pilot it first, so we will do that as well. And it does work with any kind of student data software that Dr. Sosnovic may decide the district is going to go forward with. Any questions?
What is this going to give us that we don't have now?
Mostly it's ease of use and also availability across the board. It has some components. First of all, it's not housed here. It's an online based system. So anywhere we are, we can access it just easily. Very easily. It has a parent component portal that could almost work like our on-demand bus cards. We get that currently through Sapphire. There's a transportation tab. There's always complications every day to import and export from Sapphire to our software now is a complication. This kind of has its own standalone parent portal exclusively for transportation. So we certainly want to utilize that. And then the efficiencies of the routes with the ability. There's a list of about 10 things that we became aware about with COVID, with going with the hybrid system in trying to transport students and trying to create these two runs and implement them into Sapphire for parents to get that information. These were items we probably would not have found if COVID didn't hit, so it sort of showed the flaws in our current software. It also doesn't allow us, the current system does not allow us to do the scenarios. When Ms. Holman and I are talking about different ways to save on runs or shorten bus rides or make the runs more efficient. A lot of times we have to manually do that run where this is giving us that extra help of looking into it for the efficiency.
So this will allow you to do what ifs for different routing.
Yeah, infinitely. Yep. The what ifs is a much easier task. All the what ifs right now are currently a manually installed system, and we spend hours upon hours.
So this might be one step that might make it a little bit easier to reduce bus times.
Correct. It's certainly
Not
something
that that's
yeah,
going to happen, but it'll make it easier.
it constantly evaluates the runs for efficiency based on where the students are. Instead of us manually having to know the runs and the routes, and as office staff goes in and out and drivers go in and out, that data gets lost with the people. So it just puts it into a software program.
And I saw this was a Canadian company, it looks like.
It is, but they're local. I think they're based out of Indiana. There is a company, it is the main component is out of Canada. However, the office that we're dealing with is out of Indiana.
Art, what's the, I mean, I noticed one of the things that jumped out for me was that obviously with overlapping the existing agreement, you know, they're charging you $294 per bus.
Yeah.
For the initial contract year, and then they lower that to $98 per vehicle. How does the $294 and the $98 compare to what you're paying now?
The $294 was similar. I have to go back and look at that. He just billed it at 18,000, so I have to divide that out by 7 to get that exact number for you.
It'd be like 260.
Yeah.
In total, the recurring contract cost fees are similar to what we currently have budgeted. I don't know off the top of my head how the contracts are set up in terms of like unit cost. But when we look budgetarily after implementation, it's very similar to what's existing in the budget.
Are they involved in the implementation, or is that
They are.
self-service?
They are on the actual data, the quote on the end, there's a 10-hour, I'm going to get it exact. It's the 10 hours of customization. That's one thing. So what they do is they'll give us within this quote 10 hours of anything that's customized just to Northwestern Lehigh. Then they have the 5 days of comprehensive on-site software training. That's included as well, $10,000 worth of that. So they're actually on-site with our staff.
So is that included? That's included in.
That's included in the number that
They're
we
charging you for that.
We are, yeah. It's part of the price that's presented.
And the billing begins when? So you said you're kind of trialing this as an overlap. When does the billing start? On
The
this?
billing begins right away. The only thing that we're really trialing is going to be the parent portal at the bottom, the $3,400 at the bottom of the price quote.
All right.
The parent portal, whether we decide to keep that or not, we'll make a decision on that. But we've talked about this for years and we've never actually trialed one. This is one that's built in. Every other one had to go to a secondary app. This is the reason we went with this is it's their software, their GPS, their parent portal. It's all theirs. So it's a seamless across the board. I think it's the best option.
So does that GPS function require us to put hardware on the buses?
It does. Yeah, and they're currently there as well. We currently have a GPS system. The reason that this GPS is important to this software is it utilizes the data of what the drivers are actually doing, comparing it to how the routes are listed, making that comparison and figuring out efficiencies. It's a constant ongoing thing that currently we do not get. Oftentimes the software will print out a run that tells you to make a right or the left, and the driver knows to go a different rate. It's just better. It will utilize that data from the GPS to say, oh, the driver is doing this every day. The route could be better by doing this, and automatically makes that change. Obviously, with permission of us saying, yes, make that change. Our drivers are our best asset. They know these roads like the back of their hands. They're really savants around here. And our routing software gets it wrong a lot. And the drivers have to fix it. So this helps with that, talking to each other.
Art, question real quick. The routing software we had last year, what's the price difference of these two?
Yeah, it's per year, it's very similar. They had to implement a one-time implementation fee as well. And it's very similar per year. I think we're actually about $2,000 cheaper by going with this per year. It's just that initial one-time fee that is the expensive part.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The GPS information from the buses, is that secured so that nobody else can see where these buses are? Like parents can't dial into something and find out where the bus is?
That is correct. They cannot. It's not a.
That's a security thing.
Yeah, you'd have to have that access to our software. That's a permission level that's not given out.
Okay.
That's part of the trial for the parent system. Most of them that run well will say, we are 10 minutes from your stop. It won't tell you where the bus is, but it will save some parent phone calls. If the bus is running late, you can push a message that it will let you know. We want to trial this to see what it tells you. Some of them will show you where the bus is, which you don't necessarily want, but some of them will say, I am 10 minutes from the child's stop. That's fine, and that will save it for phone call.
Yeah, that is correct. When we get into a late situation for whatever reason, we have to take a bus roster, then go into Sapphire, select those kids, and then push that message out. By that time, we get 5-6 people together and just start calling the parents.
Or we send a message that says, this is the bus 17, and
Yeah.
everybody else ignore it.
Yeah.
In
So
the
it's a-
keys of quickness.
It's a bit cumbersome, and we usually try to trigger that after about 15 minutes late. We can usually manage 10 minutes late, maybe only 1 or 2 parents will call, but after about 15 minutes, we'll start to get concerned, and we'll start calling in, and we got to trigger that message.
Is this an item that is part of like a buying co-op, or how do we evaluate the pricing? The reason I bring it up is like, seeing that we've got overlap, seeing there's a major difference of about, I think it was $13,000 or $14,000 in the setup. We just incurred costs with the last software. Like we sort of now restarting this. Like my approach would be negotiate that year one price from $294 down to the $98 renewal price so that we're not having to absorb a double expense.
I can tell you that started at over $400. So that component of what you're referring to did occur. Originally, they were well over $400 for that initial cost, and we basically compared what we paid with Bus Boss back in the days. Prior to that, our GPS system was Safe Transport. We took all of that data and worked with them, and they were able to do it. They claim that they're on the local government contract. I haven't gotten that information from them yet. And this is also still, I should say, in Jess's hands, being reviewed as well. So hopefully Jess can get it turned around, but it's still being reviewed by the attorney. Yeah.
So the enhancements and the additional services that we can get are considered worth the price difference between the two. It sounds like. Well, this will be up for action in a week. And is there any more information any board member needs to try to help along with the decision?
I was just gonna ask, is it being used locally at other school districts that you're aware of?
Some bigger ones down by Philadelphia is what I was told. They're getting me the client list, current and some contacts, and then I'll reach out to them and let them return back on it.
And Art, the renewal rate, is that locked in for 2 years, 3 years?
I think it says in there that it's just per year.
Yeah, I saw that per year. I don't know if you took them to the sidebar and said, hey, can we get this guaranteed for 3 or 2?
I could ask for that. I did not ask for a multi-year contract. But
Hey, just so we know what the renewal rate is, because what happens after year 2, it doubles.
Correct.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, well, now we'll see this again in a week, and let's move to district finances. And I guess the rest of the meeting belongs to you, Leslie.
Thank you, I think. So just Stacy, before you click on that, just the documents that are attached to the agenda item tonight, there's multiple documents. Obviously, we'll review and go through the budget presentation. However, you also will find there the PDE 2028 That is the required form that we have to submit to the state. That is a standardized form. The budget book, which is the supplementary book that we typically put together, has lots more detail in it, some more detailed schedules and a different analysis. And then as well as we've traditionally done a one-page overview sheet, and that is that fourth document. And that's really just a one-page snapshot, talks about the overall total revenues, total expenses, and the budget goals for this fiscal year. So I will go through tonight the presentation. I'll touch on some high-level details. But certainly if you have additional questions or you want to see more of the detail, you can go into that budget book and look, or certainly ask questions as we go along. Thank you. Okay, so tonight is really the culmination of the budgetary process for 21-22. This is the prescribed step by PDE in terms of the budget cycle and timeline. We are required by law to adopt a proposed final budget. The way we traditionally have worked through the budgetary process. This is really the budget document that contains most of the significant changes that we'll make for the budget. We'll make some minor adjustments between May and June, but certainly the numbers and the data that we present tonight is really our final spending plan or proposed plan as we move into the 21-22 fiscal year. So as we start all of our presentations, we always start with our budgetary goals. We established these back in the fall. Really focusing and trying to come back and make sure that we're keeping at the forefront what is the goals of this budget, not just trying to say how much money do we have and what can we fund with it. We're really trying to work the plan and make sure we're hitting these targets or as close to it as we can to make sure that we keep our overall strategic plan and mission and values and all of that in the forefront of our decision-making process. Just a quick recap. Next slide, please, Stacey. Just a recap of where we've been. So back in October, we started our talking about the budget and our budget discussions. We held our budget seminar back in October. In November, then we talked about the preliminary budget overview, which was really that 10,000-foot view of the budget and where we saw things starting to materialize as we started refining our numbers. As we moved into January, then we were required to adopt a resolution to stay within the Excellent Index or adopt a preliminary budget. The board chose to adopt that resolution, which meant we would not exceed 3% increase to our tax millage. As we moved into February, we talked about budgeting strategies and talked about how we utilize fund balance, how we utilize our budgeting strategies to keep that long-term budgetary focus. Not just focusing on the short term, what we need to do now. Then as we moved into March, we did some updates on our revenue assumptions. That was a presentation where we were able to restore a lot of back to pre-COVID amounts for specifically local revenues. And then as we moved into April, we talked about some updated expenditure assumptions. So the major changes that we'll talk about tonight from April to May are really in staffing. As we finalized our staffing plan, we know staff intentions for next year. Those are really the significant changes that we built into the budget for this total proposed final budget adoption. And then as we move from May into June, that one last final budget adoption, which then locks in, and we submit our spending plan to the state for next school year. Next slide, please. This is the budget summary. This is the recap as we've moved through the process. Familiar structure, really high level, looking at the major categories: salary, our building and department budget, salary and benefits, our district-wide and grants, and then our total revenue. So as we have moved through the budgetary process, you'll see back in January, we were looking at a shortfall of about $3.7 million prior to any tax increase. As we have worked from January through what we're presenting tonight for May, you can see we've refined both through a combination of increasing revenues, decreasing expenditures, as well as looking and refining some of those budgetary categories. We're able to bring that shortfall down to $2.3 million prior to a tax increase. So we'll talk very briefly about the changes that were made from what was presented in April till tonight. The major focus of tonight's presentation is really comparing the current budget, so the 2021 budget that we're living in right now, to what we're proposing for next year's 21-22. Next slide, please. This is just a chart that I put together just to visually see kind of where we have come from. So you can see on the far left, the 2021, the difference between the blue and the orange line is really that budgetary shortfall or our use of fund balance for the 2021 budget. And as you can see, as we move from October to January and to May, we've had increases and decreases with the goal always being to bring those lines closer together as we get closer to June. So that's the far right, then you can see the proposed final budget shortfall, again, prior to any proposed tax increase, we're looking at $2.3 million. Okay, next slide. Very briefly, looking at what changes have materialized since our April budget meeting. So on the revenue side, really the significant change there, the addition of that $738,000 is we are now including on a budget neutral, so you'll see a corresponding increase to district-wide and grants for the ESSER 3, that federal funding. So if we go back to April, we weren't sure the final allocations, we weren't building those numbers in at that point in time, or excuse me, back to March. We now have those allocations, and now we've built half of that spending into the plan for 21-22. On the expenditure side, you'll see some minor increases to building department budgets, again, compared to April, with the most significant changes to the budget within that last month to our salary and benefits, and as we finalize our staffing plan. Overall net change to expenditures, we're looking at about a $14,000 decrease, again, compared to April. Next slide, please. Okay, any questions on changes from April before we move into the focus of the comparison of the budget to current year 2021? Okay, the next set of slides we'll go through, we'll talk about revenues, talk about some of the changes. As we move through, I will point out the page that there's more detail associated with these slides in the budget book. So you can see the red highlighted box here on the screen, that is our proposed final budget for 21-22. Estimating about $32 million in local revenue, 13.9 in state, and 1.3 million in federal, for a total estimated spending plan of a little less than $47.3 million. This final budget number that's shown up on the screen here does include a millage increase of $855,000, which represents that 3% actual index.
Leslie, that second column, 60 million, is that a mistake?
Yeah, that is.
Should be 30 million.
Yep, I apologize for that. Sorry about that. Yeah, the math is looking right, but the number is wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, next page, Stacey, please. Okay, local variances for revenues. On the corresponding page in the budget book will be on page 2. These are the major increases or decreases that are compared to the current 2021 budget. So real estate taxes, this year we saw really a minimal increase to our assessed value growth. And so that would be the natural growth that occurs in our real estate taxes through new development, changes to properties, new warehousing. We really saw very minimal growth this past year. The primary change driving that $474,000 is really the restoration of our collection. So the collection percentage, as well as restoring our collection timeline. So the discount period running July through August, flat period September and October, and penalty for November and December. So really the combination of both restoring the collection percentage and going back to our standard collection timeline, we were able to restore about $474,000. So it's not new revenue. It's revenue that we had in the budget and we collected in 1920. We reduced it, not knowing the effects of COVID on the local community. So it's really a restoration to restore back to that baseline of what we saw previously. And as you recall, as we worked through the collection cycle for the current 2021 budget, we actually did collect those revenues, which was what made us confident that we could restore those collection percentages back. So I don't want everybody to walk away thinking this is new money. It's just restoring what we previously had accounted for. Same thing for earned income tax and delinquent real estate taxes. We had pulled back on those for the 2021 budget, not knowing the impact of COVID. Based off of collections, based off of what we're seeing trending wise, we do feel it's appropriate to restore again back to 1920 levels. Earnings on investments, unfortunately, this is one area that we are proposing a decrease just based off of the current interest rate market environment. Coming off of, we had some significant amount of CDs that came out that came due in the fall, which obviously were at a significantly higher rate than what we're able to earn interest on. For the foreseeable future, there aren't a lot of opportunities for CDs and interest rates anywhere near what we previously saw. So as a result, we're pulling back on that revenue line item. Contributions, so this is both, would be foundation, but also any other kind of local contributions that we've seen. We have seen a little bit of a lag this year in terms of donations from the community or different venues. We did feel it was appropriate to pull back some of that for next year. So total variance in our local revenues anticipated at $575,000. Added to that is the proposed millage increase of $855, which gets us that net increase of $1.4 million to local revenue. Next page. So next we'll talk about the millage recommendation that is built into this proposed final budget. This information, more detailed information on the tax rate and assessed values can be found on page 6 in your budget book. So the proposed millage rate for 21-22 is 17.7360 mil, which generates about $855,000. So what does that mean to the average taxpayer? So right now our average assessed value for a residential property within the district is $220,000, which means it would be $113.52 increase to that average taxpayer. So the total tax bill, which I probably should have included in the slide also, but didn't, the total tax bill for that assessed value property of $220,000 would be $3,902. If you are interested in seeing kind of the different levels of assessed value for either higher or lower than that 220, it is listed on page 6. So you can see the varying degrees of tax bill and tax effect on properties. Next page. This chart is our millage rate history, just showing really where we've come from over the years and where we go. You can see both the increase in millage rate, but also the increased value of our mill. And so if you scroll a little bit, Stacy, see if we can get the bottom. There we go. So in 2013-14, Lehigh County performed a countywide reassessment. At that fiscal year, we were required to reset the millage rate. And so we reset our millage rate back then to the 15.9631. You can see for a period of time, we did not raise taxes. As you recall, that is the middle or kind of the whole build out of the TIP project down in Weisenberg. And then in 18-19, that project was built out fully. We did not see significant increase to our assessed value over year to year. And so you can see in 18-19, we did have a tax increase. And then the last several years, we've seen that too. Now you can also see the estimated value of a mill, although we are increasing that tax rate and that millage rate over time, the estimated value of a mill has really remained pretty consistent. So, you know, we hover right around 1.6 million, a little higher every year. But so although we're increasing taxes, we're not really gaining a lot of growth in that value of the mill. So, and again, the value of a mill is different for every school district. It's just based off of your total assessed value and your millage rate to see how much revenue you're generating per mill that you're levying.
Difficult one to understand.
Yeah.
Does anyone really understand mills? No.
Yeah, that is a good point. I think that we could take a minute and explain for anybody listening that it's really not a valid comparison to look at that mill value compared to another school district. It's apples and oranges. It doesn't have any correlation at all.
Yeah.
And, we get into that trap a lot of times with being compared to Parkland and East Bend because they might be a different number.
Sure. Yeah, and certainly, I mean, that's a perfect example. We even do that internally. We look at, you know, where does our millage rate fall compared to the rest of the county? And certainly that's important from a taxpayer standpoint because the assessed value within Lehigh County, it is a similar mark of measure for your tax rate. So, you know, a resident in Northwestern Lehigh being taxed at our millage rate is going to pay less than a taxpayer in Catasauqua because their millage rate is higher. However, on the flip side, at the district level, the value of our mill depends on really the total assessed value of our property. And so we're at $1.6 million. You could go down the road to a Parkland that's their value of their mill is worth millions of dollars. Or, you know, go up the road to Northern Lehigh and their value of a mill is probably close to $1 million, maybe even less. And so there's a varying degree. And so people can say, certainly, you know, Parkland is a much bigger district, Northern Lehigh is a much smaller district, but when you look at the local level and the taxing ability of the local school board, really there's some huge disparities on the ability to raise taxes based off of, or raise taxes and generate revenue based off of the overall demographic of your district. And so we also know we have about a third of Lehigh County's farmland. which as long as those properties are in the Clean and Green Act, they have a reduced tax rate. So we have a significant amount of property within our district that is paying a lower percentage of taxes because of that act. All good things. When you go down the road to a Parkland or ESPN, East Penn, where they geographically have large areas, they don't have nearly the amount of farmland. So their properties are 100% taxable compared to ours that are very limited in most cases for farmland. It's just the demographic and the makeup of the district.
These might be hard to accept concepts of living in this rural area, which we enjoy so much. You know, the clean and green, you know, we have the farmland all around us in the open spaces, but there is a cost to that for living over here, and that is the value of that land to bring in taxes to support the school district. Same with the bus rides. You know, we have this open space that we all enjoy, but that also means that it takes longer to get from here to there because we live out here in the open spaces. So there is a trade-off that we all have to accept moving into this area to enjoy what we have, and we have to keep this in consideration.
Bill, just the only thing I would add to that, because I completely agree with you, is I would just add while also being held to some of the same requirements as those other districts, right? So for example, as a student in our district chooses to go to a cyber charter, you know, that money goes with them the same as it would in Parkland, right? So while we're not generating revenue on that green space, we are essentially losing those dollars for that student at an equitable rate as a district like Parkland.
Yeah, and I think all that being said, we still have the third lowest millage rate in Lehigh County. And so I think that it goes against our strategies, our use of fund balance, us being very budget conscious and fiscally responsible, and really trying to balance creating sustainable revenue over time and building revenue and building that recurring revenue, but also being cognizant of the taxpayer and being cognizant of what we can afford and what we can live within. You know, I think board members have said over past times, like live within our means. And certainly, you know, we are using use of fund balance and we have budgetary shortfalls, but we're trying to really plan it and be accountable both to the district as well as the taxpayers. Any other questions on that? Next slide. Then as we move into state revenue variances, certainly not as positive a picture. This has been, if you go back 10 years, our trend. We don't receive a lot of increased state funding year over year. That continues to be the case, or the outlook, at least as of what we know now legislatively at the state level for next school year. So we've some increases. You'll see the retirement reimbursement, and that's just a function of the employer contribution rate increasing. We receive about a 50% reimbursement of our expenditures from the state. So as salaries increase, as the contribution rate increases, we see a corresponding increase to revenues. Same functions a similar way with Social Security. Our rental and sinking reimbursement, this is a function of our debt service payments. So as we've talked over the years about PlanCon and reimbursable projects, this revenue line item is really driven by our debt reimbursement schedule and what kind of reimbursement on each of our borrowers we're receiving. So we are anticipating about a $70,000 decrease to that line item. The final item you'll see there is the Safe Schools grant. This is the grant, if you recall, that we had applied for when we opened and started our police department. It was a 2-year grant program that we were approved for. So we had budgeted those 2-year grant funds. Those grant funds are now gone, so we are removing that from the budget. So in total, about a variance of $48,000 decrease to the state revenues compared to the first fiscal year. Next slide, please. Federal revenues, a little bit of a different story. However, we all know around the table, as we talked about the federal grant dollars, these are one-time monies infusion over several periods of time. However, they are one-time and will go away in year 3, year 4. So as you can see here, the federal block grant, that PCCD, that was that funding we received back in the fall. That was previously safety and security money. Then it came through this fiscal year as federal COVID mitigation money. So obviously that block grant is done, so we're removing that from the budget. The CARES funding, which was part of what we're calling ESSER 1, that was the $140,000 that we received for this school year. That also was one-time funding that now will go away. So you see the corresponding decrease there. And then the addition of ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, we've talked a little bit about that. We have significant allocations in that. Our plan right now is to budget half of that in 21-22, the remaining half in 22-23. The grant period does extend beyond that. Our plan would be to try to spend evenly across those fiscal years, and then any remaining funds being used in the third year. And why that's important is because of maintenance of effort. So we have federal requirements for maintenance of effort, which basically means we need to spend with local and state funds similar levels year over year to be eligible for title funding at the federal level. So although it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with these one-time ESSER grant funds, it does have to do, and it's a calculation for title funding for the future. So we're going to keep a close eye on that and make sure that our plan tries to spend those funds equally so that we stay in compliance with that and don't risk losing title funding in the same years that those ESSER funds go away. So our total variance in federal revenues for next year is about $680,000. Again, that's an increase to the budget. We also have the corresponding increase to the expenditure side. Since they are one time and we can't supplant, we're basically just use those federal dollars to cover our recurring costs within our current budgetary expenditure. Next slide. I talked a little about this on the previous slide, but right now, ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 are the significant amount of federal dollars that we see coming to us for COVID relief. So ESSER 2, the total allocation right now is $659,845. The grant period date through September of 23. So again, you can see we're splitting that funding, the plan over that 2-year period to try to create that consistency for maintenance of effort. ESSER 3, which is part of the American Rescue Plan Act or the ARP Act, that allocation is $1.3 million. Same grant period, and you can see our same budgeting strategy of over 2 fiscal years. The caveat with that ESSER $3, you can see the footnote at the bottom. We are required to have a 20% set aside, which equates to about $262,000, which has to be used for targeted learning loss. So as we've talked about, and we'll talk a little bit about later tonight on the agenda, for summer school program and some of the summer offerings that we're looking to do the next 2 years, which would utilize some of these federal dollars to help with that learning loss, as well as comply with the grant requirements. Any questions on that? Certainly, if there's other grants that come along, we would continue to apply and hope to get those funds. These are the ones that are known as of right now, so we're going to incorporate those into the budget for next year. Okay, that summarizes revenues. So any questions on revenues before we jump into the expenditure side? Okay, so on the expenditure changes, there's some detailed information starting on page 8 of the budget book. What we typically have done here is looked at the categories on what's called the object basis. So those categories of salaries, benefits, services, supplies, property, debt service, other financing uses. So we've utilized this method in the past to talk about different changes to the budget, but then there's also supplementary information that is required for PDE that breaks it into, I'm going to call it, it's called the function object. And so that really think about more on the department level. So the function would represent the department, whether it be instruction, special education, superintendent's office, business office, buildings and grounds. That is the required PDE format. The presentation tonight focuses really on those major categories. So salaries district-wide, all departments, all staff. Okay. So total expenditures from our budget summary on the earlier page is about $48.7 million. The changes that we have incorporated into this budget compared to 2021, a net change of about 1.7 million. Again, keep in mind a significant portion of that is related to that one-time federal funding. So although we're increasing the revenues, we're also increasing the expenditures to be budgetary neutral. So after that 2-year period, we do anticipate that revenue to be reduced, as well as the expenditures to come down at that state level. And we're going to jump into the 100 salaries. Mrs. Holman is going to present the staffing plan, and then we'll go back into the specific changes that are generated from the staffing plan on the budgetary basis.
Thank you, Mrs. Frisbee. I would tell you staffing this year was definitely a little different than it has been in the past. Not necessarily some easy decisions that you will see on the next couple slides. We really looked at our budget goals about maximizing efficiencies, minimal impact to programs, and our short-term and long-term goals. Our goal really being when we looked at the April budget where we met most recently spoke to you about a $3.3 million budget gap with about $1 million in staffing changes that you will see on the coming slides, brought us down to the 2.3 that Mrs. Frisbee talked about on a slide previous. 855,000 in a tax increase brings us to what we expect to take out of fund balance. So I will go through some of these and certainly take any questions that you might have. So if you can move scroll, she can get it on the screen. Every single year you see a slide in the May budget presentation. It looks very similar to this one. Talks about our class sizes that are in guidelines and board policy on the left, which you've seen several times, as well as the number of sections we are recommending and the number of students. I would draw your attention to in kindergarten, the top number that has the double asterisk is really what was projected for us to have in kindergarten. You know about this time, we don't always have the projected number of kindergarten students registered. So we do have several more months, obviously. So Northwestern Elementary is depicted in terms of projections to have 65. We actually have 46 as of today. There's 45 at the production of the slide, 45 students registered. We are not recommending right now making any changes, but kindergarten is always really volatile up until the very last moment in August, and sometimes there's decreases in adds. Weisenberg Elementary, same. Projected is the one with the double asterisk at 54. Weisenberg is already exceeding their class projection, so they already have 56 students registered. So we'll certainly watch that closely as to where we need staff allocations in kindergarten, or we have in several years in the past. We've never actually done it, but had the potential to move students from one building to another to balance class sizes, because Weisenberg is over their class projection now. You will see the class sizes. These should look similar to they have in the past. Obviously drawing your attention to fourth grade. Fourth grade is the only class that even can be feasible for a potential reduction because it is the smallest class. The only reason we selected fourth grade, you'll see the other numbers are in the 60s and 70s. That's the only class right now. That's what is our current third grade going to fourth grade that are hovering in the 50s in each building. Those class sizes, I would tell you, are not desirable in 27s and 29s, but in order to take advantage of the two attritional savings, which if you recall is about $267,000, we are making the recommendation to decrease fourth grade in both buildings. The class sizes at Northwestern Elementary will be approximately 29 with that change in staff of 1. And Weisenberg Elementary will be class sizes of 27 with that change of class in 1. You'll see the total enrollment on the bottom that will fluctuate a tad as we decide or bring our kindergarten enrollment in. We do have some of our kindergarten students enrolled. Mrs. Pulley and Mrs. Burlett, I believe, are listening online, and they recently did a sign up for screening. So I think that was what we'll people start talking in terms of bringing their children in for screening, and we hopefully will get a better depiction of the accuracy of those numbers and making solidifying some of those numbers as we move forward. Rachel?
Yeah, I just want to clarify something. So if I'm reading this right, if you wouldn't be deducting a staff member from fourth grade in each building, you would have class sizes of 19 and 18 respectively.
If that's
right?
I mean,
give or
three.
take one or two. Just clarifying that.
Yes, and you would divide 58 by 3, and you would divide 54 by 3. So we historically, and this fluctuates over years, but we have historically run about 3 sections in every building, in every grade level. So that reduction, if you did not take it, you would just do this, and it's not always straight division, but it's close.
Right.
54 by 3 and 58 by 3 respectively.
Can we go up to kindergarten?
Sure.
I think you said we were over there, but by the numbers, it looks to me like kindergarten is bracketed at 17 to 22.
I meant over our projection, not over our class size. So they were projecting Weisenberg to come in at 54.
So we're still okay with our current policies in kindergarten.
Correct.
One thing I can't remember why we ever created policies with a minimum number there of 17. I don't know why that was ever put in there. It doesn't really, to me, it doesn't really offer up anything. I mean, we're not gonna, We're not gonna eliminate a class if you don't have a minimum number or something. I don't know why that was put in there, just a comment. Maybe that's something we could look at, because I think going forward, we're going to have to continue to look at class size as an option to try to stay within our means for spending. Class size is something we're gonna have to continue to take a look at in light of not only the cost, but the benefits that we get from using technology in the classroom that allows us to have a higher class size without adversely affecting the education of the kids. And that's just an opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I would tell you, there's a lot of research on class size data. And I think we're one of the only districts that actually has class size guidelines in place. There's been several years in the past where, you would hear red section here, red section there in terms of exceeding the class sizes. You're right. I don't know why this policy that has the guidelines precedes me and has been in existence for a very long time. I do see Mary Ann on, so maybe she knows what year. It precedes me and it's been in existence a long time, but there have been times where we certainly exceeded the class size guidelines here or there, and she usually, as did I, show down on red on the screen just to draw your attention to them. I do think class sizes is something, in order to have financial savings, we're going to have to take a look at moving forward, and certainly I don't like 27 and 29 in fourth grade, but it's certainly going to be something that over time, in order to bridge the budget gap, we're going to have to take a hard look at.
Okay, I didn't want to get off track, but this is something that we're going to have to continue to take a look at in the future. And coming up with those maximum sizes, and I'm sure there's research and data that can help us along to come up with what that number should be based on how big our rooms are and what kind of technology we have. But it's something you have to take a look at. Thank you.
No problem. Stacey, in the middle school, and I'll certainly summarize these. In middle school,
Just for a minute, Mrs. Holmes,
Sure.
I'm sorry. Before we move on to that, can we just delve a little further into the fourth grade class size?
Sure.
We talked a lot
Did
about.
you use your mic though?
I thought I did.
That's right.
It did, but it didn't. We talked about the unknown of how many physical bodies we think we will have back in school in September, and I know you don't know that right now. But do you believe these two numbers are hard physical bodies in those classrooms?
Yeah, I do.
Nobody will be online, totally virtual, have that option.
There. Well, that comes in a slide in a future presentation in terms of how we might propose spending the SSDR dollars and how we would have online options for K-5. But there is some option that we are considering for online K-5. What I don't know is how many students will select that versus come back. These are students we currently have in the system now, and they are in our seats currently. If students choose to return, we made the assumption, at least up until the last survey, that if they came back now up until the third and fourth quarter, that they would reasonably come back next year. It's the kids who continue to remain online, whether they will come back or they will remain online, that is uncertain. Figured if they came back now, they would likely start with us next year. So that is the assumption by which those numbers are made.
So there are additional students who could still come back into fourth grade?
There are additional students in every grade level that could come back.
What are the implications?
You
know how many there are and how far that might push this class?
There are hundreds across the district. Yes, we have a breakdown by grade. There are a number of students across the district that continue to remain online. I have probably the most recent poll of numbers. At one point, we were at 350. At our last survey, we were in excess of at least 130 students who wanted to remain online and a whole bunch of unsures.
Jen, are you asking for a commitment date? I mean, are you just pretty much getting families through the summer?
Well, no, we asked one survey in order to plan, and then we will ask for a commitment, primarily because a number of students chose blended. And if we choose not to offer blended, which is probably the only thing that is a good probability next year, that we won't offer a blended option, then those are students that potentially could go either way. They could say, okay, then I'll come back. Or they could say, no, I really want to go online, and they could potentially go either way. So yes, at some point we will ask for a commitment. We have not done so yet.
I'm just trying to interpret that. So that means that conceivably,
They could be
these
higher.
numbers could go into the 30s.
They could be higher.
And these other class sizes at all other grade levels could also escalate significantly.
That is correct.
That's correct.
There are a handful of students in every single grade level that continue to be online.
So these numbers are pretty significant departure from what has been familiar to people within the school district.
That is a correct statement.
Do these physical classrooms accommodate this number of kids given the COVID restrictions that we're currently living?
They do not. We would probably likely, if the COVID restriction was social distancing, Mr. Oaks has trailers that we would need to buy for Northwestern Elementary.
Oh, the plot thickens.
Lest I remind the board, this is one of the very reasons we talked about restructuring the elementary schools and chose to table that topic.
Right now, most of the restrictions as of the announcement yesterday have been removed with the exception of the face covering order. What will September look like in terms of spacing? I don't know. I would tell you that should more students get added to 4th grade, they will be tight in those spaces, and we have investigated alternative building options as well as alternative temporary options to outfit Northwestern Elementary.
So I'm not sure how this would vary with reconfiguration, because in the projections with reconfiguration, it had 6 classes at six 4th grade classes that were within the class guidelines. The implication here is that this inflation in numbers is being caused by reduction in staff, and that wouldn't change if we reconfigured for next year.
That is not accurate. So in the reconfiguration plan, we removed both 2 of the retirement teachers, saved the $267,000 next year, did not exceed class size guidelines, and did not eliminate any programs because it was a simple division of the 58 plus 54 divided by. So we eliminated both of those teachers, saved the attritional savings, and did not increase class sizes outside the class size guideline, which I think is what Mr. Hyde was referencing.
Yeah, if you do the math, right? So if I look at it, and again, there's lots of ways you can figure this, but if I look at 4th grade with the number of students combined, you could potentially eliminate 1 4th grade teacher, and your class size would be 22.4 per class, and 1 5th grade teacher, and your class size would be roughly 27 or 28 per class. So that's the flexibility of having the combined that I was looking at when I, liked that option, which was the flexibility to kind of address the entire block of children and in class and play around with it. Now you're left with a scenario where you have, a 4th grade, low number 4th grade class across both schools, with the only option to really increase that class size.
Yeah, and well prior to the elementary reconfiguration discussions, if you recall me saying multiple times, there are no more eliminations to take at elementary with the current structure. Any of those class numbers you divide by 2, they are higher than we are comfortable with. 4th is uncomfortable, and it is the best option because of the class sizes. And so and this is prior to elementary configuration, I said, we are done with and if you recall, every year we had gone from 4 to 3 and we had done reduction. The same reduction that is now going into 6th grade, which you'll see on the next slide. But unless we made some structure changes or shifted some students and we had class sizes that were combined, there are no core content reductions that we see in the foreseeable future in core contents the way they're structured. The only reduction you can do is divide them by 2. And 4th grade is the only one that's even foreseeable, and it is a stark difference from where we've been. I would tell you, our elementary principals I think are on. I don't know that any of us like the 27 and 29. And Dr. Warfel, if it ends up being something that's higher than that because of students coming back, we will make adjustments, and it could mean a different section that is 2 versus 3. Just like we've done with kindergarten in the past. There was years where we had a kindergarten person budgeted and they didn't, and the enrollment, I don't know that I would run Northwestern Elementary at 15 but you look at 45s and that's too high for kindergarten. So like you are in some way constrained by the numbers and the structure, the way that they are currently listed. Like there's not another way around that. Even if you shift students, there's not another way around that.
So back to the fourth grade situation, if we were to try to get 5 classes like we would have been able to do with big configuration, in order to get to that 22 plus a part of a kid per class, we have to ship 14 fourth graders from Northwestern over to Watsonville.
The only way that I would look at it would be you could probably split the difference and ship 12. If you shifted 11 or 12, your Northwestern Elementary class size goes to 2, and then you run 4 at Weisenberg. But then I have to find 123-ish thousand somewhere else.
But you couldn't shift, that sounds good on paper, but you can't just shift 12 or 14 fourth graders without moving their siblings as well, which now disrupts
Siblings,
all the other classes.
and I don't have the plan for the following
Right.
year.
Okay.
So the message I got from the previous meetings, we don't really want to shift kids.
Right.
I mean, because there's an option to potentially shift students. It would result in 1 savings instead of 2. You shift 11 or 12 from Northwestern Elementary to Weisenberg. You take Weisenberg's 58 and make it 69, divided by 3 is 23. You minus 11 from the 54 and run it at 2 and make it 21s and 22. But that is plucking 11 kids and siblings and whoever else and sending them for 1 year, because I can't say that I can accommodate that in 5th grade. The following year, that is your only other, and then obviously that has a $123,000 budget change because it's half of the 267-ish.
And no matter where you take those kids from, those parents are gonna say, do it to somebody else. Don't do it to my kid. So what looks good and makes sense on paper, doing the math, doesn't work out in the real world when you get into the emotional impact it has. So, it's a dilemma.
One just quick question about 4th grade. If you were able to have all the 4th graders banded together at Weisenberg to allow for more room, would that make more of a difference? And could you even still have that option to band or, build upon that to make it more advantageous?
I would need to go back and look at the band schedule, because the reason we were able to do band is because it was at Northwestern Elementary with 2 grades. So to answer your first part of your question, and my elementary principals are listening so they can add in, if you shifted all the 4th grade, I guess we would need to talk about a progressive plan then. But if you shifted 4th, I need to know what we're doing with staff. We're just shifting 4th. And then yes, you could divide that and you could go 5 sections. The band came about because we had 4 grades in one building and we had 2 grades in the other. And so the reason we were able to add band to 4th grade was because of the freeing up of the specialists, because of 2 grades versus 4. I mean, we can look at whatever you want. So if you give us direction, we will bring you back something. But it is late now to make any changes to 4th grade teachers, to 4th grade parents, and shift full grade those. Does Jill have room? She has a bunch of room, yes. It's not the room.
But I think we need, and I apologize, I'm part of getting off on this tangent, but I think we need to get back to the business at hand, which is going through the budget using the parameters that we have established for the budget. And if we're surprised and we have a bunch of kids come back that said they were going to stay virtual, and we're going to have to regroup as we did last March when the sky fell on us and we have to do what we did. But I would suggest that we continue with the budget presentation using the parameters that we have established and we go from there. This is another discussion that we need to have.
Yeah, and like I said, we set up after the last meeting, our goal was to try to trim the budget gap that was $3.3 million, come back with something. You can only raise taxes so much. And looking at your budget goals for maximizing efficiencies, minimizing program impacts is where these came from. They are not impactless. They are minimizing the impact. Can you scroll to middle school and then we'll certainly go back to it. So I just alluded to this change. This is, you'll see the distinct differences between the class sizes going into 6th grade and our 7th and 8th grade. So this is that lower 6th grade class at 133 that is now next year going into 6th grade. So we are recommending a reduction in 6th grade, bringing your class size to 22 and 23. It does, however, also include a change in related arts. And so this involves a teacher who retired at the high school and one of our existing staff members moving from the middle school to the high school. It does have a program elimination. So the program elimination at the middle school is computers, which is the special. And so for 6th grade, that doesn't have a significant impact because of that class size, but obviously making that reduction now, it's timely because of a teacher retirement, but those class sizes in 7th and 8th grade are still larger. And so you will see the class sizes in 7th and 8th grade are still 27s and 28s and 28s and 29s because now you are essentially taking the same group of students and cycling them in trimesters versus quads, if that makes any sense. And so that 7th grade class and that 8th grade class are still larger classes cycling among one less person essentially. Again, these are April enrollments. So flip one more time. All of these staff changes have been discussed by either myself or one of our building principals or teams of our building principals on Friday so that staff are notified of staff changes prior to it coming on the board agenda. We are making recommendations to change. It's actually an increase to our ESL position. As you recall, we have been moving ESL students from Weisenberg to Northwestern Elementary. That can't continue any longer. We are recommending that position be increased from what is a current 88% in the budget to 100% in the budget. So that individual can go to Weisenberg and serve students that should be going to school at Weisenberg. We are, as I said earlier, eliminating 2 elementary teacher retirements. Again, the positive part of all of this is that there's no one losing their jobs, but there are significant program changes and eliminations through attrition. So that's why I have that labeled attritional reductions. That does have a disadvantage of increasing 4th grade class sizes at Weisenberg to approximately 27 and Northwestern Elementary to 29. During the course of the year, we had a middle school FCS teacher retirement that was replaced with an existing staff member, and we are not replacing the position the existing staff member came from. So this would eliminate the middle school and high school gifted instructor, which is the person who took the middle school FCS retirement. This would increase. We will increase the elementary gifted teacher to cover what is called middle school seminar. So gifted students at both the middle school and high school kind of have 2 pieces to their programming. Obviously, part of it is managing their IEP and their caseload requirements, and part of it is also teaching of a seminar. So this individual will not manage the caseloads of the gifted students in the middle school, but will teach that gifted seminar, and we will increase her in order to do that. It is a daily responsibility at the middle school. Our middle school and high school teachers and counselors will cover the gifted case management, but that will be a permanent elimination of a gifted teacher in middle school, high school. Eliminating 1 6th grade teacher, again, that is an attritional reduction from a retirement. I mentioned that on the previous slide. Replacing a high school business retirement with an existing staff member. This is a move of a staff member from the middle school to the high school. Eliminating middle school computers, and I don't want you to go over that. Computer certainly is integrated in some other areas, but there are things that are taught in the current middle school computer curriculum that will not be taught from this point forward. There is some that will be able to be inserted as Mr. DeVico and Mrs. Stitzel look through the curriculum in some of the other areas, but there will be certain things that will not be taught from this point forward to any middle school student, like typing and some other skills that is in that particular curriculum. We will be eliminating 1 high school special education teacher, which is also an attritional reduction. Questions about the summary and professional staff recommendations? Okay, the last slide is either admin and support staffing and reductions. We do have an administrative reorganization in this building. We eliminated a PIMS secretary. PIMS, if you recall, is the Pennsylvania Information Management System. Allocated those duties to another secretary in this building to be responsible for the uploads that go to PDE for that, and eliminated 1 part-time receptionist in this building also due to a retirement. Administratively, you will see on the May agenda an addendum to Act 93 to reduce the police chief hours. The addendum does say the number of days. I would rather not say that publicly, but we are reducing the number of days of the police chief from his current contracted number. And this decision will also be made in June, but we believe there will be a recommendation to potentially outsource the management of food service, which we've been involved in the last few months, evaluating companies and contracts, and that will eliminate a food service supervisor. That decision obviously to be made in June. But those savings across the board are depicted in your budget, and as you saw between salary and benefits, if you look at the salary and benefits categories, which I think Leslie will go over in the next few slides, you will see it's about $1 million in savings. And so that is where it all comes from, essentially. And Leslie will certainly go into more detail on the finance side of it. These were not easy decisions or discussions, but necessary. Questions that you have about any of the class sizes, professional staffing, admin or support staff changes I talked about, or any additional information? You don't really take action on staffing changes, you take action on the budget. And so, Mr. Delacour mentioned at the beginning of this meeting about action. There's not really action on staffing changes. It is among the administration's responsibility to move staff and change staff and make staffing recommendations even up to the very last moment, as long as we can do it within the budget now. If we do need additional teachers that are not budgeted for one reason or another, or whether it's same class sizes, that will likely be a decision we will bring back to you that will have to come out of budgetary reserve. Because right now we do not have any additional positions. So the only place for a position to come from would be budgetary reserve. And Leslie can talk a little bit about that when she gets to the fund balance slide, because we have $400,000 in budgetary reserve in fund balance.
The ESL requirement for elementary school, are we going to end up with one at Northwestern and one at Weissenberg, or is the need at Weissenberg?
Well, we only have one ESL teacher district-wide. Okay. So that ESL teacher that is 88% served right now, 3 of the 4 buildings being Northwest Out Middle School and High School. We are proposing she provides services at all 4 buildings. And the students that would be or would have been at Weisenberg, Mrs. Stitzel is going to work with the families, because equally, I'm not sure of a mistake or a problem we caused. We're going to give them some options in terms of shifting back to Weisenberg. And Mrs. Stitzel will work on that with us. Mrs. Stitzel, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you summarized it correctly. There wouldn't be an addition of a position. It would just be we're increasing her hours so that she becomes a full position. Currently, she's only a partial position. So we would be able to serve all 4 buildings then instead of just 3.
Thank you.
Other questions before Leslie continues with the financial piece, and you'll see how this kind of flows through. I can certainly obviously take any questions after you see how it flows through.
The PIMS requirement that we have for the state, that's one of these unfunded mandates. The new software we have, student software that I think Dr. Cisnovic, you're moving into, make it more user-friendly and able to input data without having to actually key it in. Is that part of the efficiencies that allow us to do that?
Yeah, that'll be the goal. So if you could think of like a hub and spoke, the student information system is that central point where data is entered and then data is exchanged from all different systems. So there will be improved efficiency down the line after we get everything integrated with one another.
So there's no reduction in the PIMS requirement from the state. It's just that we're finding a better way to do it.
Yeah, that's right. So no, it's actually really increased very much over time. The data requirements that we need to provide the state and other authorities.
And the system might make it more efficient, but I would tell you that we have some issues with Sapphire, but Sapphire and PIMS reports is not inefficient. I mean, it does an okay job with PIMS reports, but I think there's always efficiencies to be had. But the PIMS positions being eliminated, and essentially someone else is picking up right now all of those reports. They haven't gotten less.
And I believe the police chief is very comfortable that with that reduction in hours for him, he can still operate the police department as effective as it has been.
I believe that's accurate, yeah.
Any other questions, comments?
Turn it back over to Leslie. The next set of slides that we'll go through now will show how the staffing changes that we just discussed have been incorporated into the budget. And you can see the impact that that has had to salary and benefits. So we'll jump right into salaries. The 100 salary category is district-wide staff, so anywhere from teachers to custodians, to bus drivers, to secretaries, administrators. It would be anybody that is funded through the general fund that's on our district payroll. So you can see the proposed final budget is a little more than $20 million for a net increase year over year of a little shy of $12,000. And so when you think of the staffing changes that we just talked about, that was a significant impact to the staff salary and budget line item, which has basically offset increases, changes, new positions, increasing, we talked about increasing percentage contracts. That really has net zeroed out in terms of the salary line item year over year. So really, the mechanics of those changes, if you go to that more detailed page in the budget book, you can see some of the dollars that are being driven out, but really annual salary increases accounted for about $350,000 increase. But then those were offset by the staffing changes that were presented, which were a decrease of about $635,000. We had some other changes administratively, as well as support staff, looking at hours, looking at overtime, looking at substitutes, some changes of about $145,000 there. And then currently we have some additional salaries budgeted with some of those federal funds. We have about $150,000 built into this budget, which again is that budget neutral. So we have the revenue associated with that, and now we're budgeting the expenditure. And so salaries associated with summer school, so the summer programming, as well as looking at potentially a tutoring program for next school year. So those are salaries that are built in for the next, call it 2 years, and then will be removed moving forward if we cannot sustain or receive additional funding to fund those projects. Next slide, please.
I think this is significant, this page right here, because if you take the $20 million of salaries and you add 3% every year, which is contracted, that's $600,000 right there just for negotiated salary increases. And to come up with a increase instead of 600,000, we're at 11,000 or 12,000. I think that's a significant attempt to close this gap that we have between budget and expenses. Between revenues and expenses. But there's some hurt to it, and we saw the hurt. We've just been through it. But these are the things that we're going to have to face going forward in order to live within the restrictions we have to raise taxes by Act 1. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, the other important thing to note is, we look at those staffing changes and as we administratively work through, this feels like a lot, and this feels, there's going to be some hurt and some program implications. But then looking at the budgetary long-term strategy, long-term focus, knowing that the next several years we have tentative retirements or replacements, but the ability to generate the savings now without furloughing, laying off, reducing staff, and we have that ability to do that now. And so you can see then the impact that has. We talk about those recurring costs and the increase to those costs over time, and the salary and benefit line item growing over time. And so the tough decisions that we're recommending now, you can see how that now plays out. And as we get to the end of the presentation, when we look at the 5-year budget projections, you can see it has a significant impact to the outlook and the trajectory of our shortfall over time. And so, we go back to the budget goals, we have the short-term focus, but also that long-term focus of creating that sustainable budget moving forward into the future. Next slide, please. So then on the benefit side, corresponding with obviously salaries, as many benefits are driven off of your salary numbers, we did have a 9.65% increase to our healthcare premiums for medical and prescription. So that is accounting for about $247,000 of our increase stated above there. We had reductions from those staffing changes that accounted for about $95,000. Prior open enrollment changes, some flow throughs, as well as increased employee contributions on the PSERS, accounts for about an $86,000 increase. And then really minimal changes to other benefits such as Social Security, life insurance, long-term disability. And actually we're looking at about, we received our insurance renewals on workers' comp just this morning, which we'll talk about later in the meeting this evening. And so we'll have some additional reductions from this budget to June in the workers' comp area. So, an overall $259,000 increase to benefits, but really when you look at some of the changes, obviously that is being driven primarily by healthcare.
In that 259, that is not all medical. That includes all these things in bullets.
Yes, the 259,000, the majority of that increase is being driven off of our medical premiums. Everything else is, there's changes that are decreases and increases. But yes, that would be anything from healthcare to Social Security tax, Medicare tax, life insurance, long-term disability, workers' compensation benefits. They don't have that whole, any kind of employee benefit category that contains that. Then the 200. Okay, 300, next page, please. So 300 are our contracted professional services. We have a significant increase here year over year, about $377,000. And you can see directly related to student services. So we are anticipating some increases to our special ed services. We talked about previously increasing and having some additional dollars budgeted for Digital Academy, some online learning. And there's also some corresponding federal funding built in here, again, that one-time funding to offset the revenues that we're incorporating. So about $245,000 of that increase is attributed to both the special ed services as well as the online and Digital Academy. And then really minimal changes to everything else, about a $19,000 decrease in the areas of tax collection, professional development, and some other services. Next slide, please. The 400s are our purchase professional services. You can see really minimal change. This is our category that's primarily operational, repairs and maintenance, rentals of different equipment or vehicles, extermination services. So really a minimal change compared to the current fiscal year. Next page, please. The 500s are our other purchase services. You'll see a significant increase here, which we have talked about at several meetings as we work through the budget. Right now, the increase to cyber charter tuition payments based off of projected enrollment and tuition rate, as well as we have increased about $250,000 that we talked about last month, really to try to account for if any of those students that are currently with us would choose to choose a program other than one of our own programs here at the district. So the increase to the cyber tuition line item compared to the current year is about $685,000. That is a significant increase. We believe that's a conservative increase and certainly something that we will continue to monitor as we work through the school year. So that total line item is about $2.7 million now for cyber charter tuition, a significant amount of our budget annually. Increase for LCTI contribution about $63,000. That's just a function of our share across the county of the participating schools based off of our 5-year rolling average enrollment, as well as our market share of their debt service and capital needs. And then really minimal changes, about $32,000 in total to both contracted carriers. So that's our contracted carrier contract with Brandywine Transportation, insurances, advertising, printing and binding, and some travel. Again, the insurance category, we do have our final renewal now, so we'll be able to make some changes, incorporate some changes between now and June, going the right way in terms of a reduction to those expenditures. Okay. The 600 are supplies, another category that has seen a significant increase, primarily being driven by those federal funds. We're budgeting a lot of those federal funds with either technology equipment or technology supplies, as well as some other general supplies. So that's driving the primary increase here. And we actually have a decrease to our general supply category of about $58,000. Right now, we have an increase of about $100,000 built in for heating oil and diesel. We have bid opening for CSIU 16, which is the bid that we're participating in. That is actually tomorrow. So by Friday, we'll have to decide and lock into whether we select fluctuating or the firm pricing. And then we can have a corresponding, hopefully, decrease to the budget as we move into June for that line item. And then increase of technology supplies due to federal grant funding, accounting for about $794,000 of the increase. Again, one time that would be decreased when those federal funds go away. In the 700 property category, this is where our property, so anything capitalizable that would exceed the threshold for being a general supply. About a $68,000 increase here, really just based on capital equipment needs and our replacement cycles year over year. Okay. The 800 and 900 serve for both debt service as well as our fund transfers and our other budgetary reserve, other transfers. Overall, we have a decrease of about $638,000. We have, as you recall, our budgeting strategy for debt service and refi savings. We have that capital reserve transfer. We see the debt refinancing savings dropping off, which means that those dollars will decrease in the capital reserve transfer and really be restored back up to the debt service line item. So we have an increase to our debt service payments for next year of about $170,000. Not a budgetary increase because it's just a reclassification of those budget dollars from the capital reserve transfer. Corresponding decrease to our capital reserve transfers, and then a decrease from prior year. We had COVID expenditures budgeted in there and PCCD grant funds. We also had the general obligation bond 2013 refinancing. We had saved about we had $150,000 there. So in total, these line items are being reduced by $638,000. Any questions on expenditures? That really sums up the totality of the changes from the current year budget to the 21-22. In the next set of slides, we'll talk about the estimated use of fund balance, which is really the estimated use of the difference between revenues and expenditures and how we're planning on utilizing fund balance to budget that, to balance the budget. Okay.
When does the current healthcare consortium expire or up for renewal? Is that current contractor?
I think we're in the middle of a 3-year agreement. I think we're in year 2. 21-22 will be year 2 of a 3-year agreement. Yeah, and as a reminder, we do purchase our healthcare through the consortium. We are in a consortium with Lehigh County schools, with the exception of Allentown. They are not in our current consortium. So we have a purchasing group that basically our contracts are with Highmark Blue Shield and United Concordia. We negotiate as a consortium the administrative services agreement. And then the way that our program functions is a retro credit agreement, which means although we're fully insured and we pay a premium, at the end of the year, we have a settlement and a reconciliation of premiums and claims, and any, I'm going to call it surplus, goes into a consortium rate stabilization fund, which functions similar to a fund balance. We would be an event where claims would exceed premiums, that Highmark would pull out of that rate stabilization fund to cover the difference in these claims. We really operate the best of both worlds in terms of a fully funded versus fully insured, self-insured program. But we have benefited over the years from the consortium efforts.
So for those listening, it is essentially a self-funded program administered by a professional administrator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the program is fully funded, administered through Highmark Blue Shield. The consortium does have a consultant that is independent, so it's not a broker that's receiving commissions, that works on behalf of the consortium, reviewing financial reports, doing negotiations, and again, it's a collective consortium effort. Any other questions on that? Okay, so this is our proposed estimated use of fund balance. So we talked about fund balance through our budgeting strategy discussion, throughout the budgetary process. As a reminder, fund balance, we always try to target for non-recurring one-time things. So we try not to say, we're going to fund salaries, or we're going to fund this position, or something that we know will be recurring because we know the compounding effect of that over time. So we take a look at our shortfall, we look at our estimated fund balance and say, okay, what is reasonable? What can we build in as one-time expenditures to help offset that budgetary shortfall and balance the budget? So this is our spending plan with our use of fund balance for the 21-22 school year. The board is required to formally board approve committed use of fund balance. So those categories there you see in the middle. You would take formal board action at our June final budget meeting to utilize those committed fund balance dollars to balance the budget. So you can see scholarships, that's really just a procedural change. Last year, we were required by GASB rules to bring a scholarship fund into the general fund. It's just the funding mechanism to make sure that we account for those fund balances and the ins and outs of senior awards. Committed fund balance, the Mays bond pool stabilization. As you recall, our Mays bond pool debt service is variable interest rate. We budget 3% interest rate. However, 2% of that is out of fund balance. Really like a rate contingency, so that if the interest rates would spike during the fiscal year, we have the ability to have those budgetary dollars available, but not have to rely on millage or recurring revenues to account for that rate instability in the interest rates. OPEB is our other post-employment benefits. That is our retiree healthcare that we're obligated to pay. We pay for that out of our fund balance, so that has a budgetary neutral effect to the budget. So we have about $50,000 of retiree healthcare budgeted included in the healthcare line item for 21-22. PSER stabilization, $485,000. If you recall, our budgeting strategy there is as we build up over time to those increases, we smooth in, offset the remaining amount that is not included in the budget, funded through recurring revenues with use of fund balance. Now, one may say, this is a recurring cost, why are we using fund balance? It's a budgeting strategy that we're using to build up to that rate. So eventually we will fully fund the PSER rate. We're just funding that at a slower pace than what is being required on an annual basis. Energy stabilization, heating, oil, and diesel. This is one area that may change as we move to June, depending on what we do with the CSIU fuel bid. So if we select firm pricing on the fuel bid, then we will remove this use of fund balance out of the budget. If we select variable rate, then we would leave this in the budget as contingency funding in case the rate would spike higher than really $2 per gallon is the target that we look at. The millage rate stabilization, we fund our senior citizens tax rebate program through our millage stabilization of committed fund balance. On the assigned fleet replacements, we look at our fleet replacements and what we have proposed. If it's anything above our normal cycle of budgeting, we propose pulling it out of and paying for that one-time cost out of assigned fund balance. Athletic clubs are functioning similar to scholarships. We were required to bring them into the general fund. This is just the mechanism to make sure we're recording those funds correctly. You can see unassigned use. We are allocating about $22,000 to unassigned use, which means we don't have another home for a one-time use. That would be considered recurring costs that we will be utilizing out of fund balance. Otherwise, you can see it's relatively small. And then budgetary reserve of $400,000. This is really our contingency funding for unplanned expenditures that may arise during the 21-22 school year. We propose fully funding that out of use of fund balance. So you can see the sum, we start at the top with the budget shortfall of $2.3 million. All of those changes that account for about, leave a remaining shortfall of $855,000, which then will be offset or funded through the proposed tax increase. And for that detailed information in the budget book, that is included on page 12. Any questions on that? Okay, next slide, please. So one of the other things that we do as part of the budgetary process is take a look at where we think we're going to end up the current fiscal year. So this is really our best guess as to where we're going to end up for 2021. Through right now, we closed out through March. So we take a conservative look, and obviously we have known variances, either positive or negative, as we work through the budget. So as you can see here for the 2021 school year, we are proposing to be under budget in revenues by about $332,000. Although we have significant increases compared to budget in our real estate and some other line items, we have some also decreases that we aren't hitting targets on for transfer taxes, interim taxes, some other categories which are driving that proposed or anticipated shortfall. On the expenditure side, we do believe we'll be underspent in the budget for 2021. As you can see, proposing about $2.5 million, primarily being driven, you can see, out of salaries. We all aware of the change in the schedule and not operating on a full 5-day cycle, which has an impact on support staff wages, primarily transportation. So we did take a look at actual days, looked at aides, teachers' assistants and really try to project out what we think will have a budgetary shortfall, or excuse me, surplus in terms of the salaries and benefits. Looking at some of those other categories, again, just trying to look at trending, looking at year to date and trying to project out where we think we'll be. So in total, we are looking at, or right now I'm estimating a variance of about $2.2 million. However, if you keep in mind, we did use about 1.8 million to balance the budget. So what does that mean? If this would come true, we would add the differential, call it between the 2.2 and the 1.8 to fund balance. So essentially, we would not use any of the fund balance that we had planned for 2021 and really baseline or stay pretty consistent to where we've been. Now, if it's anything more significant than that, then it would obviously be added to fund balance. If it's less of a variance than I'm projecting here, then it would be a potential reduction to fund balance. So I think the takeaway from this is, we believe we'll be under budget. How much of that is still obviously to be seen till we close out the year. However, at this stage, we do believe that we will not use all, or not even most of what we had planned to use for 2021, which really restores some of that fund balance projection. Next page. In your budget book, on the last few pages, starting on page 19, you will see some detailed charts for the 5-year projections. What we do is we look at a 5-year projection assuming no tax increase over the 5 years, as well as a scenario that assumes the maximum Act 1 index increase in each of those 5 years. So that detailed information is in the budget book. This slide just really represents the picture of kind of what that impact looks like over time. And so you can see the blue bar represents the scenario that is a no tax increase. And so you can see the shortfall over time really compounding year after year, because as expenditures are increasing, our revenue is pretty much flatlined over that period of time. Conversely, the orange line represents a tax increase to the maximum Act 1 index in each of those years. So you can see that shortfall year after year of the 5-year period really stabilizes as we try to limit assumptions and increases to expenditures and build in the assumption of increased revenue over time that obviously is sustainable and compounds year over year. So you can see the trend line. Obviously, there is a big gap and a big disparity between raising taxes and not raising taxes over that 5-year period. And this it really is just for illustrative purposes. Doesn't mean we have to raise taxes, doesn't mean we don't. It could be something in between. The other thing that we recognize is when we go back and say, okay, 5 years ago, what did these projections look like compared to what we see today? We know we make changes on an annual basis. We make staffing proposed changes that obviously have an impact to the long-term sustainability of the budget. And so, this is assuming we stay status quo today, what we look like 5 years out from now. Any questions on the projection?
So this is the gap we're looking at between
Yep.
Expenses and revenues looking 5 years ahead.
Correct. And so, we may end up somewhere in the middle between the blue and the orange. And so we may not raise our taxes to the maximum Act 1 index, or we may go somewhere in between. And so we know that this is for planning purposes, the tool that we're going to keep our eye on to say, okay, we know we need to make changes that are going to be sustainable the next 5 years so that we can keep our eye on and really reduce and try to minimize that shortfall over time. And so, obviously looking at this, it seems very clear that difference. The primary driving factor of the difference here is real estate taxes. We don't have the ability to generate new revenue in any other area other than real estate taxes.
I guess what's not real obvious, but I'll state it anyway, is that this still is showing $1.5 million issue here, negative for every one of these years. So that's where the other chart you often show is the fund balance decline, which it sounds like if you're estimating this current year as not needing to be pulled down, you are kind of delaying probably by another year the inevitable hit of negative in the fund balance, right?
Yep. Yeah, and I didn't include it in the slides. However, I don't have page numbers on mine. Stacey, if you want to pull, can you open up the budget book for me, please? And scroll towards the back. My version doesn't have page numbers.
third last page.
Go back, go up a little bit to that colored bar graph. There we go. So this schedule in the budget book looks out estimated through 22. And so I don't have, you know what, right, it is, so this is the fund balance trend over time. So you can see how we, you know, have increased and then we've drawn down. So then, Stacey, if you go back to the last 2 pages, that's probably where we should have went first. The detail of the 5-year budget projections, the chart on the bottom of those pages represent that year-end fund balance. Go one more down. Yep, it's turned. So if you right click and rotate that, please. So over time, as we see those 5-year budget projections utilizing use of fund balance to offset and balance the shortfall, you can see the impact to our total fund balance over time. Now again, so like if we end in a surplus position in 2021, you know, that doesn't reduce as planned. And so that levelizes. So then all those bars go a little bit further up. But yes, we will continue to utilize fund balance to balance the budget given these current budgeting strategies. And in some cases, I think that's very appropriate. So when you look at our use of fund balance, we have a lot of contingency planning in there, right? We have the budgetary reserve of $400,000. We have the MA's bond pool stabilization. So there's things, the energy stabilization. So there's things that I think are appropriate because those aren't known costs today. And so I think we don't want to get into a position where we're never utilizing any of our fund balance. I think there's an appropriate level of fund balance. Now, what is that number is really open for discussion. Is it $1 million? Is it 500,000? Certainly trying to sustain a budget with $1 million shortfall over time is much easier than a $4 million shortfall over time. And so I think that's, you know, the 5-year budget projections and keeping our eye and monitoring that and running different scenarios is really critical because we know decisions we're making today, when you flow it through, have a significant impact over a 5-year period. And, you know, one thing we did not talk about tonight, but we all know we have the TIF revenue, right? Unfortunately, we're still about 12 years out from those revenues coming back to us. So we will get to a point where we'll be able to plan for the infusion of those tax dollars back to the district, just not right now, not in these next 5 years.
And what is the 50% that we're not getting? What's that value?
Yep, so I also have a schedule in that budget book. If you want to scroll closer to the front, I have a TIF schedule or TIF summary that outlines all of the collections that we received from inception of the TIF. So then the real estate taxes collected that we're estimating in 21 of 22 are about $1.9 million. So we're required to remit half of that, which is about $950,000 to the trustee. So at full build out, it'll be over $1 million that come back to us in that year 21 of the TIF. Go down a little bit, sorry.
So that's essentially what we're, what a tax, what a
Yep, right there.
millage increase.
At that point in time, that'll
Yeah,
be
yeah.
like an annual.
And Leslie,
Yeah, so essentially that would, you know, the infusion of those tax dollars, in theory, could be in lieu of a tax increase in that year. Just like we didn't raise taxes in the year of the TIF build out because we had increased assessed value growth over that time. It's going to be that infusion that'll be recurring because the district will receive that full $1 million for as long as those properties are there.
and do you recall when PZER is going to get together for one of their conventions that project into the future what the rates are going to be?
Yes, so PZER redoes the actuarial value report every so many years. So we have projections out. Unfortunately, every time they re-amortize the schedule, it doesn't get any better. So right now, we're really stuck in this 30+ contribution rates for PZER for the near future at least. I don't see any significant changes to those employer contribution rates probably in the next 15 years. Would be my guess based off of what I've seen in projections I've seen. So I think, you know, the relief that we talk about with PZER, the changes that went into effect a couple of years ago, we're not going to see the effect of those changes for 25, 30 years.
Leslie, somebody asked me this question and I didn't have a great answer for them. Can you just, like, in just 3 minutes, explain the current teacher retirement process? Because we're hearing about some teachers who are retiring at 50. You know, what is the current benefit package to a teacher who retires? When do they start collecting, and what percentage of their annualized income are they collecting?
You're talking like from a PSERS
Yeah,
pension
from a PSERS,
perspective?
just so
Yeah.
we can answer people when they ask about things like PSERS, how much money is
Sure.
going in there.
Sure, so PSERS is a defined benefit program. Okay, so very different than a 401k type program. So it's a defined benefit, it's a guaranteed retirement plan. So there's different classes of employees based off of when you enter the system. So the majority of our employees that are in our system or in our district right now today are a classification of employees that basically they can retire when they hit one of the 3 qualifiers. 35 years of service, no matter what age you are. 30 years of service in age 60, or age 62 with at least 1 year of service. So once an employee has met one of those 3 eligibility requirements, they're eligible to retire normally, which would entitle them to those benefits. With the way that the calculation works, it's your 3 highest years salary is averaged times a multiplier of 2.5 times the number of years of service. And that determines, call it, your annual pension. Then as a retiree, you have different options available to you of how you want to take your pension. But basically, that's just a financial decision. And so I guess I should have backed up. So when you enter the system, you don't have the ability to say, I don't want to contribute, or I only want to contribute 3%, not 5%. You are required and mandated unless you have an eligible reason to exclude yourself, which is, I'm not sure, maybe we have 1 person that isn't participating. You are required to withhold that same class of employee that I talked about, 7.5%. Newer employees are required to withhold more. So the employee is required to submit 7.5% of their wages. The district then contributes that almost 35% of our total payroll. So we don't send a check to PSERS and it's 35% of your salary and 35% of yours. It goes into the PSERS pension plan. And then at retirement, there's an actuarial calculation that determines obviously the value of your pension and your payout. But it is guaranteed, and assuming that a teacher makes that, or any staff member for that matter, hits those years and hits that requirement, they are guaranteed that pension as long as the system exists. And so, a lot of times people will say, like, well, what does that equate to? Very simplistically, if you retire normally, you get about 87.5% of your annual salary. And so, then you don't pay state taxes on it, and there's some other benefits. But a teacher leaving the system at 35 years will collect for the rest of their life about 87.5% of that highest 3-year average salary.
Plus social security.
I'm sorry?
Plus social security.
Correct.
And then medical benefits.
Yeah, so medical benefits, there's a couple different things. So certainly our district has retirement severance built into our collective bargaining agreement. So if a teacher retires, and it's different by employee class, but we'll talk about teachers for a second. If a teacher retires from the district with at least 15 years of district service and at least 25 of PSERS service, then they are eligible for our retirement severance, which consists of, I'll call it a sliding scale based of years of service, of an amount of money to be used for healthcare, which on average gets a teacher about a year of retirement coverage for single insurance. Okay. If they're not eligible for that, or if they've exhausted that, if they're eligible through state law, then they could purchase the district's insurance until they're Medicare eligible, mostly 65, right? At their cost though, not the district's cost. And then beyond that, most retirees enter what's called the HOPS, the Health Options Plan, which is a medical plan program run. It's a separate organization from PSERS, but it's in conjunction with PSERS. And so most teachers, when they hit Medicare eligible or they can't participate in the district's program anymore, will hop onto that, no pun intended, the HOPS program. And so that's typically how we see retirees. Now, I'd say over the last 10 years, we don't see, PSERS has an early retirement incentive where if you are at least 55 years of age and have 25 years in the system, you can retire what's called early retirement. There's a small penalty for your pension, but it is capped. We don't see a lot of people taking advantage of that anymore, I think because of healthcare. And so, 55 to 65 is 10 years of healthcare that costs a lot of money. So typically we have seen people exiting our system when they've met that full retirement closer to either 62. We have teachers that are staying well past 35 years of service. So I think we've seen a shift and a change compared to probably 10, 15 years ago, what we saw. I believe, in my personal opinion, being driven primarily by health and the cost of healthcare to an individual. I don't know if I answered the question.
So real quickly, the PSERs that we pay into, then we get 50% back, correct?
That's correct.
The fund that it goes to, I assume there's a board that kind of controls those funds. Do they invest in the market, or what do they do with those funds? And why do we constantly see the rise of this percentage every year?
Yeah, so there's a PSERS board that is a separate entity from the state of Pennsylvania. It is an elected board, and off the top of my head, I'm not sure the composition, but I think there's some legislators, there's, I think, some school people. The executive director of the PSERS pension program right now is Glenn Grell, who was previously a legislator. And so they have an in-house financial advising team, but then they also use outside financial advisors. And so if anybody's seen some of the newspaper articles, the PSERS fund right now is under federal investigation for some alleged misappropriation of use, some alleged budgeting, some discrepancies in budgeting, which have affected actuarial calculations. And so, what comes out of all of that, I'm not really sure. The effect that will have on future rates, I'm not really sure. We know that at the state level, the state legislators certify the employer contribution rate. So when you talk about, and again, I'm going to talk my personal opinion here, but when you talk about why are we at 35% contribution rate, a lot of that goes back to decisions over the years that were made by the legislators, not PSERS itself. And so the legislators have the ability to set that rate wherever they want. And so when the market was really, really good in all those years, and the fund was almost 100% funded, the legislators held the rate or went arbitrarily really low. And so then when the market crashed, they needed to increase more drastically instead of having just a sustainable rate. I mean, when I first started here in 2008-9, the PSERS employer contribution rate was 4.78%. So when you think over really a short period of time, going from 4.78 to the 35, the reason it's been so drastic is because the fund is underfunded. So when you talk in terms of the actuarial valuation and standards that are national standards for retirement plans, the reason why it's so high is because the plan is underfunded. My opinion, because of decisions that were made to arbitrarily keep the contribution rate low in a very long period of time. And then we drastically had to play catch up so that there was enough cash flow for the retirees to actually receive their cash payments on a monthly basis.
You also had cost of living increases every few years back then.
Yeah, and then, in recent history, there have been legislative plan changes. So in 2011, they made some plan design changes. And so employees hired after 2011 have a different set of retirement benefits than the majority of people in the system prior to 2011. Then again, in 2019, they changed the plan again for new employees and created a DC plan that functions a little bit more like a 401k, but that didn't have any significant impact on what we have to pay today, or like I said, probably the next 25 years till we see the effects of that. So, but when you think about it, they make a plan change. Schools are in this environment that we're not increasing, right? We're flatlined or we're decreasing staff. So until the majority of the people in the old classes move out of the system and the majority of your people are in this new DC plan, we won't anticipate significant changes to that employee contribution rate in the near future. And I do have one final budget slide.
One more slide.
Just a summary slide. So just to summarize everything we've talked about as it pertains to 21-22 budget, total estimated budget of revenues, $46.4 million. Total budgeted expenditure is 48.7 million, which generates a shortfall of $2.3 million. They're proposing the tax increase of a 3% increase to the millage rate to generate $855,000. So our proposed shortfall of 1.4, which would be funded out of that use of fund balance. So you will see this budget for approval next week on the 12th. We are required to adopt the proposed final budget, and then we can talk about, or as we work and refine some of those additional things that we can change in the budget between May and June, we'll make those changes and then bring you a final budget document at the June workshop.
Let's see, just a quick question. Assuming those variances that you mentioned regarding the fund balance come true, where will we be in total fund balance going into next year's budget before the use?
Okay. So we estimate our fund balance at the end of this June, so June of 21, to be $16.2 million. Total fund balance.
Where was the most?
It was at 15.2.
Going in the right direction.
Yeah, based off of those proposed variances for 2021, we would increase fund balance by $150,000. Remember, we used about 1.8 to balance the budget. Yep. And then offset by those variances. Now, obviously, that's subject to change based off of what the actual variance would be for 2021.
Because 2 years ago, I think we were estimating that to be considerably lower than 16.
Yeah.
Especially through the heavy. So that's positive.
Correct. Yeah. If you go to the fund balance history, you'll see in 2019 we reduced the budget by about $3.4 million. That also coincides with the year we used fund balance dollars to fund the stadium project. And then if you go back several other years, the last time we reduced fund balance was in 2016. That corresponded with the ESCO project that we completed at the high school. And so outside of those years, we've been pretty stable and even adding a little bit to that fund balance, which has been our trend. But if you go, further back, we used to add about $2 million, $1.5 million, $2 million to fund balance every year. Now we're at a part where we're adding a little bit, but we're pretty flatlined in terms of utilizing that use of fund balance that we're planning for. So again, go back to what's an appropriate amount of use of fund balance. I think you can see where we have been by not significantly adding. We're still generating positive variances when we get to the end of the school year, and not needing to utilize that fund balance. Where if we were in a position where we had the balanced budget and didn't use any use of fund balance to balance the budget, we would be adding about $1 million, $1.8 million to that fund balance and growing that fund balance. Where this methodology that we're utilizing really is kind of stabilizing our fund balance, which has allowed us to do things like capital projects, so the stadium renovation or the ESCO project over time.
So I think this is a related question. Will any of those COVID funds allow for reimbursement of the money that was used for the HVAC upgrades?
No, unfortunately not. Yes and no. Would that project be eligible for COVID reimbursement? Yes. However, because we did that project prior to the COVID funds being in place, there's federal procurement rules that would have needed to be followed. We did that project under the CoStar's contract, so the state purchasing contract, so we did not have to bid it. However, it doesn't comply with federal requirements. So because of the dollar threshold, we could not utilize COVID money for that. We would have had to do a formal competitive bid, just like you would a construction project, to be able to utilize those funds. So some school districts are doing that. Fortunately, some school district projects are falling under the threshold and they're able to put it in. For districts that are outside of that threshold, they have to do a formal bid procedure to utilize that. So this particular case was unfortunate because the threshold is $250,000 and our project came in at like $331,000.
So I was thinking that was fund balance money, but it was not. It was
That's high school.
high school.
Capital money for that.
No good deed goes unpunished. And that's not the first time we've gotten caught by being proactive and doing what is right to be done. And then later on, some kind of funding stream comes in. so that transportation and some other ways. Any other questions, comments for Leslie?
I just have one follow-up. I did, Dr. Warfel, pull the numbers while Mrs. Strickey was talking. Northwestern Elementary has 2 students that could projected to be added to that 29, and Weisenberg has 4 in that grade. So in that grade, we pulled how many students we have currently suspected that were either enrolled in Digital Academy, homeschool, or cyber. That would be potential adds. That doesn't mean we won't have more or less, but that I believe would be the swing. 2 at Northwestern, 4 at Weissman in that grade.
Well, thank you, Leslie. It looks like we're making progress. We went into this year, a year ago, not knowing what was going to happen and what the fallout would be from COVID and the expenses that we were going to see. But gee whiz, you underspent, or our people underspent by $2.2 million. The expenditure side of the budget, which is significant. So that's the good news coming out of this past year. Another, I think, good news for the community is that we projected revenue loss for both EIT, the earned income tax, and the real estate tax, and delinquent taxes, and all those revenues that we thought were going to go down, and they didn't. So that is a positive sign for our community as well, how we fared this COVID problem that we had. The the big number is $2.7 million leaving our school for charter schools, and that's exceeding the EIT budget. So we're now paying out more than we're bringing in with the EIT earned income tax revenues. But that 2.2 million underspent this year, I think, is significant. I hope the public realizes that, there's been a lot of talk about, you weren't open full time, you only open 4 days a week, and virtual and this and that. But the $2.2 million savings is significant. Unfortunately, the people who drive our buses and the people who couldn't work their full work schedule are the ones who are feeling the pain from that situation. But thank you for your presentation. I think we thank you for the questions. We had some good discussion on class size and PSERs and fund balance, and it was a good discussion. So we'll take action on this next week. And if there are any questions between now and then, please call Leslie, and I'm sure she can come help you. All right, the rest of the agenda is yours as well. We're going to move into the items that we will take action on in a week.
Yes, thank you. So 502 is the BCIU tax service agreement. This is a routine agreement. We utilize Berks County Intermediate Unit for our tax printing of our real estate tax bill. And so tax printing, they do the mailing, the notices. They provide the software that we use as well as our tax collectors. So this is a new agreement, but however, their terms have not changed and the fee structure has not changed compared to current. So estimated fees for next year about $9,500. And that really has been pretty stable going back to 18, 19, even before that time period. So it's a great partnership with BCIU, and I think we're fortunate everyone in the county is utilizing BCIU, I think with the exception of Allentown at this point. So this is a routine agreement. The next agreement is, or not agreement, but rather the trash bid. So if you recall a month or so ago, I brought to you, we received a proposed increase from Waste Management. We were not satisfied with that increase, as well as customer service issues that we've been having with them. So we decided to go out and do a trash bid. The winning bidder, as you can see highlighted here, is Republic Services of New Jersey. So we are bringing this forward for your approval. Compared to our current contract with Waste Management, this is about a 5% reduction. So we'll save about $1,000 next year for trash services. So assuming the board approves this contract at next week's board meeting, then Art and I will begin the transition process because I assume we're going to have to transition the dumpsters and make sure that it's as seamless as it can be for that transition for July. Okay. The next item is the Forecast 5 renewal. This is the software that we purchased for this current 2021 school year. If you recall, we purchased the 5 site, which is really some historical data and comparison data information that we're able to utilize. The 5 Cast is the budget forecasting software that we're utilizing, very dynamic. I've been in the system a lot this past year. So we went back and forth with whether we were going to recommend the renewal or not. Obviously, we've not invested the time in 5 Cast, so we see value and would like to continue that. In talking with the team and trying to figure out, the value services, we believe one more year of the 5 site software would be beneficial. We have pulled a lot of great information out of there, whether it be school comparisons for line items, for different, you can look at special ed services, you can look at free and reduced lunch, a lot of dynamic charts that go back and basically pulls all of PE data and synthesizes it for you, and you can create comparison groups. And so when we talked about athletics, we can create a group, a subgroup that looks at colonial league schools and how do we fare compared to colonial league schools. We had county schools, IU schools. So we do believe as we continue to move through the budget process the next few years, this to be something that would be very useful. So we are proposing, it does have a significant price tag, but we do believe we're using it and we're getting value of that. So for next year, we are recommending the full renewal package of both services. And it is an increase of about,
Any questions on the fund?
it's about a 1% increase to the fees. Okay.
Okay.
Okay with that. Thank you. The insurance renewal, this was an item that I added actually today. We got the renewal from EHD, had a conference call this morning with Rob Thompson, our broker. Pretty standard renewal. If you could go to page 8 for me, please. And this document is attached to the agenda if you want to look at the different coverages, the different details. But really, this is the summary sheet that I wanted to focus on. So based off of our current policies that we have in place for 2021, we are anticipating a 1.7% increase to premiums, about a $6,800 increase overall. And so it's really small, but I'll just highlight a couple of the coverages. And we are seeing some increases to property, which unfortunately is standard across the board, just based off of claims and things that have happened in the past year. We see a decrease in our workers' compensation. So we have a pretty aggressive workers' compensation back to work, return to work program. We've partnered with Key Risk over the last several years and really have done a nice job on that. So we continue to see our MOD going down, which in turn is having a positive effect on our overall premiums. So we are anticipating about a 5% decrease to our workers' compensation premiums for next year. Cyber liability is one that's going up more. Had a conversation with Rob today about that. And really, unfortunately, it's the environment that we're in. The insurance companies are starting to see schools and education being more targeted because our systems aren't as robust and secure as, Bank of America and Target and some of the bigger guys. As they tighten up their services, we become more susceptible. And so overall, the industry is experiencing some significant increases to cyber liability as we move forward. The other item that I'd like to talk to you about tonight is our student accident insurance. This is an area that we consistently have maintained a program. There is a program option that would allow us to expand coverage to some other groups. So right now, our student accident insurance covers basically sports, gym class, and intramurals, where this expanded policy would also cover recess, as well as any kind of sponsored activities. So summer school programs, different field trips. And so what the change is, the change is I'll call it the schedule of benefits. So the way that the student accident insurance program works today is if a student gets hurt playing lacrosse, student goes to the doctor, mom and dad's insurance would be the primary insurance on that. The district would file a claim, open the paperwork, process the paperwork to get sent home to the parent. Parent would be responsible for the first $100 out of pocket, and then the insurance would cover any out-of-pocket costs. So in essence, your deductible, your co-insurance. The change to the plan design would function more like a schedule of benefits. So think of how your health insurance plan operates. So you'd have a limit on physical therapy. There would be deductible thresholds for certain services. So it wouldn't be a completely open-ended product. However, given the claims that we have experienced over the last 5 years, we believe that the change to the plan would have minimal impact on the dollars being paid out to our families. And that being because primarily our families are coming insured and have a primary insurance. And we don't have a demographic that is underinsured or not insured at all, like some of our other neighboring schools. And so it's about a $10,000 decrease to the premium, expansion of the coverage to include a couple other covered activities. And so in speaking with Rob today, it is something that I would recommend that we look at and move forward for next year. And then certainly we'll monitor it. So we'll look at claims, look and see if anybody's hitting those max cap limits. We can always revert back to the old plan if we would want to in the future. So assuming the board is okay with that recommendation, that would be one change that you would see to the insurance moving forward. Any questions on that?
Any objections to that recommendation? No. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the next item is the Tiger Summer Smart programming. I'll turn it over to Jen to talk a little bit more about the details. But basically, as the program is developing and we're moving quickly, we would ask for pre-approval to execute contracts associated with that programming, just so that we can be in compliance, obviously, with requirements, but not lose the opportunity to get those programs in place for the summer.
So just this week, I did put this in admin content because it is targeted right now for students with learning loss. It's not open to any student. But we did put the brochure that students will have access to in admin content. It is about 11 pages that describes the partnerships with the Lehigh Valley organizations, as well as some of our teachers involved. And we're looking at 4 weeks of in-person programming for elementary and 4 weeks of in-person programming for middle school as well. And they are right now making phone calls to some of the families, but you can certainly see the details. It will run from June 21st. Through July 16th for those 4 consecutive weeks, obviously with a break for 4th of July, which is in there. And we have programming everything from coordinations with LCTI, Camp LCTI, Mad Scientists of Lehigh Valley, Penn State University, Lehigh Valley, Da Vinci Center. And so we expect that those contracts, every one of those organizations will have memorandum of agreement for them to come on site and offer some of those programs here, as well as what our teachers are going to offer in recovery and English and math. And so we have every day structured. The posting, I think, is going out today or tomorrow. We do have enough staff that are interested, and there's some pretty exciting programs. And so we think that our kids will enjoy them greatly. Like I said, our staff have already identified a number of students with learning loss that they are targeting. Obviously, if we don't have enough spots to fill up the spots, then we will open it to others. But right now, they are making those phone calls and sending those emails to get those families about to register. It does indicate that it's funded by federal grant dollars and is free for all students. And so it would be a 9, primarily besides the Camp LCTI option, would be an on-site 9 to 3 daily program. And so we expect there'll be some memorandums of understanding or agreement that we will have to execute when those people come on site.
Just a quick question, is transportation provided in that, or is it self-transportation?
Right now I have self-transportation. However, there are field trips which we will provide transportation to. And if a student needs transportation to LCTI, we will transport. I did tell our principals that if there's a student who needs transportation, we would figure out a way to work it. Right now, the transportation I have grant funded is the field trips and LCTI. But if there's a student that needs it, I've already talked to Mr. Oaks and he believes he can do a small loop and grab the kids. Thank you. Dr. Russell?
Estimated enrollment, they have a sense of how many kids might be served?
We right now are targeting 72 students at the elementary school and 24 students at the middle school. I don't know where those numbers will come in the end.
Sounds like we've identified through assessments of some sort at the teacher level, 72, you said that we believe have fallen behind where they need to be. I guess my question here is, are we strongly encouraging these children to come? What is the school's position with knowing that these children now have fallen behind? Are we obligated to ensure that they are now brought to the proper level of education? And I guess how do we respond to the fact that some of them probably will choose to opt out of that and head into a fall knowing they're now
Well, yes, a couple of really good questions. I would tell you that, yes, they can opt out. We are going to try a personalized approach with the teacher calling the family because they've had, especially at the elementary and middle school level, conferences and have a good relationship with those students at this point, and talking about the student's progress and encouraging them if this is something I think would really benefit. They also can sign up for 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And so they have some flexibility that if they are able to just sign up for certain weeks, that they can do that. But the beginning of the email actually is coming from the teacher. We wrote it that says something like, thank you for having a conversation with me about your child's progress. We would really be really excited if you would consider coming to the summer program. To answer your second question, yes, ultimately we have responsibility across the board. That could be manifested in different ways. So not the learning loss money is not just summer. And so summer is the first portion at when we're taking a crack at it. But you have to remember, we are also looking at devoting some dollars to, we've been calling them tiger tutors after school hours, because some of the kids, if they don't want to come during the summer or have a bad connotation about summer school or having to come here for the summer, we might have a better opportunity grabbing them after school. That's a conversation Mrs. Yadish and I had as to why we aren't offering it at the high school during the summer, that we would have a better opportunity for a high school student who might have fallen behind to be able to get them right after school and stay after school or come in early. And so we also have some dollars that we're working through to try out of the SSER 2 and 3 for tiger tutors. This also would be something for next year. And you also have to remember, we have, I'm going to call them built-in systems. So we talked a lot about MTSS as part of our previous meetings, but MTSS is part of their process is to identify and help students that have fallen behind for any number of reasons. And so we will, even if they don't opt into this program or opt into Tiger Tutors after, there are ways that we can help get that student up to speed. But yes, our obligation is to meet students wherever they are, for whatever reason they are. That could be a transfer in, that could be, they didn't connect as regularly as we would have liked them to. And we've had conversations at this board table about our recommendation for a number of students to come back 4 days a week, even when their school wasn't, so that we could help them be more successful. And so we will hit every one of those avenues to try to get them up to speed. We also, for special education students, have ESY opportunities, which is going to run concurrent with this, but I know that's not necessarily the population you are probably asking about. But take a look at the brochure. That should give you an idea of what we're kind of planning, what the topics are. We do the Pearson contract that I think is next, maybe, is it's called the Summer Smarts program that's specifically research-based to get kids caught up for ELA and for math. We will be instituting that with students as well as the summer programs and summer camps. We tried to kind of sandwich the English and math instruction with a fun camp activity. We know that a lot of the camps this year are filled up, and we thought if we could get them on site, that would certainly be something that would be advantageous for our students in science and STEM and all kinds of exciting things. As I said, we did take advantage of Camp LCTI and block some spots at Camp LCTI. It's already a well-established program, and we think that it will also help some of our middle school students with being exposed at LCTI. That might help some of our LCTI members in the future, and students really realizing what it's about when they have the opportunity to work in labs down there. So we saw this as a win-win. Win for our kids, win for our staff who will be able to work with the students this summer, and win for a variety of different local camps, vendors, programs like Camp LCTI that we would be able to tap into with some federal dollars. So right now, I think Leslie and I have week 1 of camp in ESSER 2 because we're trying to put everything for this year. Remember, week 1 is in this school year, and then the remainder of the weeks will go into ESSER 3. And we'll give you a comprehensive presentation, but wanted to get you what we're currently thinking and what is going out to parents as late as today. And though they will require some execution of some contracts, I believe, with some of these vendors. Any questions, certainly let me know.
The next item, 507, Sharon talked a little bit about. This is a contract that will be used in conjunction with our summer programming. We are still in the process of negotiating some legal changes. So we hopefully will have that wrapped up prior to the meeting on the 12th. The next item is not routine. It's something pretty unusual, I'd say. So this, because the PASLAP or the Pennsylvania School District List liquid asset fund is made up of school districts. They changed their investment advisor to PMA. And so this is just a formal attestation that says that the board has been made aware and they understand. We use this account for our PNC Bank procurement cards. So we don't have a lot of money. That's really just a flow through account that was required to be opened in conjunction with our procurement cards. The next item, 509, is the Power School agreement. This is the agreement that you saw about a month ago. We are still in the process of negotiating the legal terms on this. So my hope is to have it finalized by the 12th. If not, I will pull it again and hold it until June. So just as a reminder, this is for the talent ed services associated with some of our HR functions. And so we'll, again, bring an update for either the 12th or hopefully in June for this item. The next item, 510, is hometown ticketing agreement. This is a service that we are looking to switch to, which would be used in the athletic office as well as potentially with student activities. So basically, I'm going to say it's similar to the system that we're using right now for musicals, where you can go online, take your seat. This would be used for electronic ticketing for sporting events and other events. We are looking to utilize this potentially for graduation, to allocate seats for graduation. So that's why we're bringing it to you now. Also, still pending legal review. We're in the process of negotiating some of the contract terms with hometown. And then there's a secondary piece embedded for if we would utilize this to collect funds. So for either gate receipts or student activity, fundraisers, things like that. We don't have all of that wrapped up yet. So that will be something that we'll bring to you in the future, but hope to get that up and running probably for the fall. And so again, this is something that we're hoping to have finalized, to have board approval on the 12th so that we can utilize it for graduation this year. The next item, 511, is the Technology and Education Legal Counsel Consortium through the IU. This is a routine item. We see this annually. We have found value in this consortium over the years and have at this point an anticipated fee of about $559 for next school year. Any question on that? Okay. 512 is the Unalani Park Pavilion rental. This is something that we fund out of student activities. This is something that happens annually for the 7th grade. However, previously it was paid for and funded by Nestle. Nestle is not extending that offer to pay this year, so this would be funded through student activity funds.
Before you get to the reports, can we go back to Power School one more
Sure.
time? Is that something we have, is this a renewal? Is this something we're using now?
Yeah, so what happened with this is a software that we're utilizing today. It was bought by Power School. So we have a current agreement with another company who previously owned the software. It's now bought out, so that's where the negotiation of the terms is coming into play. So we are currently utilizing it. However, and I think we can certainly talk to this more specifically. We are evaluating whether we want to continue utilizing all of these software apps or move to a different method. So we were proceeding with at least going through the agreement, but we still, obviously, if they are not willing to negotiate with our legal terms, we may look for an alternative anyway.
This is strictly HR that uses this?
Yes, this is these applications. So you can see the agreements, the talent ed, applicant tracking, the perform, and the LDAP. That's specifically HR related duties. But Power School has a whole other host of services under it. These are just the 3 specifically that we're utilizing.
Okay. Thank you.
Not what I wanted to talk, but.
No. Okay. Moving down to reports, 513. You'll see the monthly recap report there. Pretty standard month. We continue to see interim real estate taxes, delinquent taxes coming in. And we did receive our quarterly payment for retirement subsidy this month, which was obviously a big infusion of dollars. And then on the expenditure side, very routine. Payroll costs about $1.6 million, corresponding benefits, and really minimal spending in other categories other than that cyber charter tuition line item. Okay. And then I have 2 updates that aren't requiring board action. The first is the fuel bid update. I think I mentioned this previously. The fuel bid opening is tomorrow. If we are locking into firm pricing, we need to do so by, I think, at 3:40 on Friday. So when that bid comes in, Art and I will talk. Typically, we'll call Bill and say, you know, here's what we're thinking. Does this make sense? We'll probably follow that same standard procedure again this year if we're looking to lock in to that firm pricing on Friday. And then the board will receive this as a retroactive approval on May 12th. Okay. And then the second item is the senior citizen tax rebate program. This is really just an update and making sure the board intends and wants to continue offering that program for next year. Again, this is the program that we instituted several years ago. It mirrors the state program in terms of eligibility requirements. So if someone, a senior citizen, meets the eligibility requirements to receive the state tax rebate, they would be eligible to receive at least a partial rebate for us. And so we process about $30,000 of rebates on an annual basis, which is currently included in the 21-22 school year. We do release those forms on our website and have them updated. So I'm really just looking forward now that the board wishes to continue that program, or if you wish for us to do something different with it. It doesn't require board action, but if you want to do something other than the current program, we have to talk.
This was a pretty controversial program when we first put it into place a few years ago, but seems like every year it comes up, we want you to look at it again and see if you want to continue doing it to do this rebate for the senior citizens who qualify because of their income level to get a rebate. $30,000 to get a budget.
And we do currently have it funded out of that use of fund balance. So it's not being funded out of real estate tax revenue or other revenue. It is being funded out of reserves.
Okay, we're good.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. That was a lot of information to cover. I neglected to do something at the beginning of the meeting. I intended to mention something about Employee Appreciation Week, which is this week. So all of you employees, maybe your company's doing something for you, I don't know, but Jennifer brought this to my attention, and perhaps it's better that we didn't do it in the beginning of the meeting because it might mean a little bit more now that we've gone through the budget and the staffing and all of the other things that our staff does for us to try to keep this place running the way it runs. But Employee Appreciation Week was first celebrated in 1995 here in the United States. I think it's a worldwide movement now. But I just wanted to say on behalf of the Northwestern Lehigh School directors that we could give a shout out to all of our employees. A huge thank you to all of the Northwestern Lehigh Tiger staff that we have working in this campuses. Thank you for all your dedication that you bring to all the variety of important jobs that all of you do for our district, and for your loyalty to the taxpayers who provide you with the means to work here, and for your commitment to providing the best education that we can afford for the children in our community. This week has been set aside to honor you, and this board is extremely appreciative of what you do for our community, and a big thank you for all that you do. And maybe that can be broadcast to the rest of the staff in some way, and I give this to take with you. Thank you. Okay, any other old business from anybody on the board? Seeing none, let's see, on the new business, we have a few items. We have to elect a secretary and a treasurer whose terms will begin July 1st. Current secretary is, of course, John Cassiano, and our treasurer is Rachel Scheffler. No, I'm sorry, Todd Weiser. And I would ask, this doesn't have to be done for next week. You want to have a ballot next week?
Well, usually I list who, so I usually list approval of. I don't know if Todd is continuing to be interested, I don't know if John is continuing to be interested, and if there are any I usually list the appointment on the main call.
Let's ask Vice President Hernandez. John and Todd, if you're interested, please contact him and let him know. And if there's anybody else that has an interest in it, also call Todd. And then we'll come back at the next meeting with a ballot or something that we can take action to review that Secretary and Treasury position. Okay? And
The next one you did, this is just the recognition of the IU ballots that you all filled out individually and gave to Stacy, and I believe she got everyone. So that's just the formal, but you filled them out. They were individual ballots, remember?
Mm-hmm. So the last item under new business is appointment of an LCTI representative to the Joint Operating Committee, which is currently being done by Alan, but I think you created for yourself a conflict of interest by having your son apply for the job there, and, which is a good thing. So Alan has got to step down, and he's represented us very well down there for the last, 3 years now, 3.5. And from all that people that I come in contact with down there, they are very appreciative of what you've done down there with the JOC. So that opens up for us an opportunity for anyone who would like to sit in on those JOC meetings once a month with a meal. I think you're still
Yeah, get there early enough. Yeah.
I think the meal starts at what, 6?
5:30.
5:30, and that's optional, but then the meetings are usually
Executive session starts at 6. Yeah.
and the meetings are usually less than an hour.
7, yeah, 8:30.
Okay, so if there, you don't have to do this tonight, but to think about it, and if you'd like to put in I guess the term is a year. I don't know. I know we have to appoint, we have to elect somebody to do it, but I don't remember if there's a term limit to it.
I don't know, I can check that. Alan's
I
been.
think it was just, I think it was just reappointed last year. So I think it's 2 more in this term.
Okay.
I believe.
So if you're interested, it might be a 2-year stint, and
We'll come up again.
let Jennifer or me know if you want, would you like to do that? And I think our alternate right now is still Joe Batson. Right, Joe?
It's Joe.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay. So let us know, and Joe, if you want to step up and take it on full time, let us know that also.
No, if I could just say one thing on behalf of like Tim, Dr. Rushton and LCCI, Alan has done an excellent job at LCCI. I concur with Bill's comments. Sure, although I'm sure his family member is happy to be employed, he will be well missed at LCCI. And so thank you for your service. You've done a great job representing the customer.
You're a former student.
Correct, yes.
Well, you've certainly done a great job.
That's why it helps. Like you said, the meal is, the students prepare it, so you get to see the interaction with the students. They tell you how they went through preparing a meal, so you get the background of the whole, the whole shebang there. So it's very nice.
So you're still going to keep your position as occupational?
Yeah, I go on the occupational advisory committee. Yep, still do that. So that's
good.
That's another good interaction you get. Picking curriculum stuff. Good.
Well, let us know if you're interested. It's really I've done it for a number of years, and it's really a great school and a great mission they have down there, and have a lot of fun doing it. And you meet it's a good networking thing for meeting other school directors from the 9 sponsoring schools in the county that you can network with and become friends with. Okay, with that, we'll move into communications, courtesy to 4. At this point, we will offer courtesy to 4 to anybody who'd like to address the board, and begin by stating your name and address. And no one this evening. Okay.
No one raising their hand.
No one raising their hands. And
Wait, hold on a second. Actually, Mrs. Matika. Come start here.
I'm sorry, I'm having some computer issues. I just thought I'd start off tonight and thank the board and Mr. Delicker on behalf of the board for your kind words and heartfelt thank you for the staff. It's been a tough year and they've given 150%. And I do appreciate that you recognize each and every one of them. So thank you.
Thank you, Luann. Okay, we do have an executive session for personnel immediately following this meeting. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Rex,
Second.
second by Mrs. Lister. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.